It's 9 o'clock. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, Deborah. Good morning, everybody. This is the meeting of the Templeton Fire and Emergency Management Committee meeting. And today is Friday, January 14th. And I'm calling the meeting to order. So if we could have roll call, Ms. Carey, that'd be great.
Directors Giardini
Here.
and Logan.
Here.
Okay, so on our agenda is, the first item is AB 3361 Compliance. I'm assuming General Manager Briltz will give us a little summary regarding that.
Yes, I absolutely can. The board members will certainly recall that for about 18 months, the governor had an executive order that allowed the board and the committees to meet remotely, electronically, much like we're planning on doing today. That lapsed at the end of September, just after a bill was signed known as AB 361. That bill allows the board and its and committees to meet remotely if certain findings can be made. Up until this point, the board of directors has been making those findings on behalf of all of the board and all of the committees of the district. And the board last did that on December 7th. Those findings that the board makes and any action that this committee would make are only valid for 30 days at a time. So the board approved a resolution on December 7th, but the 30 days lapsed on January 6th. And so the board of directors is scheduled to again consider a resolution that would extend it for another 30 days, but not until your next board meeting of Tuesday. So we're in this little like 12-day window here where the board's action for to comply with AB 361 has lapsed. However, I've conferred with legal counsel in this committee, even though the committee cannot pass a resolution, you could make those same findings for the purposes of permitting this meeting to take place remotely. And if you're unable to make those findings, the meeting will just need to end, and you'll have to wait until the board makes the findings or the committee meeting gets rescheduled in full compliance with the traditional Brown Act, which means holding the meeting in person and more importantly, being available for the public in person. The committee members, I'm sure you're aware, we've been dealing with this for some time now, so it's nothing new here. We've got COVID-19. At the beginning stages of this AB 361 compliance, the board cited the Delta variant of COVID-19 as being a factor in increasing cases that had occurred in the early fall. Since then, of course, actually that began to subside, and then in early December, a new variant has become known, and actually the caseloads have increased exponentially since that time. Given what we know about COVID-19 and given that the board has previously enacted this resolution to permit the remote meetings, I don't think it's difficult for you to make that determination. But that's something that committee members would need to do and do so publicly as a part of the record. And so you would need to, I guess by sort of minute action, it would be recorded in the minutes for this meeting, determine that the conditions exist under locally in compliance with AB 361, and you've determined that this committee should meet remotely because of those conditions. And just for the record, the state's state of emergency continues to exist, so you are authorized to make this decision. So again, that's for the committee members, and again, just for the record. There is not there's not a resolution to consider because the committee doesn't have the authority to adopt a resolution.
It looks like Director Logan has a question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just want to echo what General Manager Briltz has indicated. The board has continued to approve the resolution at its board meetings. since AB 361 was passed. And the reason for that is because the public health officials, both state and locally here in the county of San Luis Obispo, have indicated that masks are required for meetings. To avoid having us meet with masks on and those public members participating to see us masked, the board has moved forward with a resolution. So nothing has changed from a public health standpoint with regard to COVID-19 and the number of cases and the guidelines that the county public health officials have issued that would change why we would not approve AB 361 and moving forward with a remote meeting. So my recommendation is that we move forward based on that information.
I'll second.
So is there a concurrence from both committee members to have made the findings that in compliance with AB 361 and allow any meetings of this committee to take place over the next 30 days, although you won't need to rely, you very likely won't need to rely on that beyond Tuesday if the board makes those findings that'll satisfy this requirement for any subsequent committee meetings.
Yes, I'm certain that we're in compliance with the findings for 361 to allow us to hold this meeting today.
Okay, good deal. So that's just a kind of a housekeeping item, and you can move on and continue the meeting.
Okay, second item on the agenda is the fire engine purchase analysis. I'm assuming that Director Logan also got the write-up provided to us by our chief. I'm assuming, Chief, that you're going to do a brief summary of your letter because it was very detailed, and then we can go through and ask you questions if that sounds like a good procedure for you. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, actually, I have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to attempt to screen share here, and hopefully this doesn't flop here. Okay. Okay, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so just I'm going to go through this really briefly because both of you do have the document that I gave you, but I just want to recap on a couple of these things. I have added a video that kind of describes the issue that's taking place with the engine. But to start with, and I've touched most of these items with both committee members, but I just want to recap. We are having pump issues, ongoing pump issues, and that are taking place with 7195. We've spent a lot of money on it this last year, and to investigate and repair the pump, it has been brought to our attention that it's going to be rather expensive. We're talking potential transmission replacement, transfer case, pump housings, potentially the pump itself. So there's a variety of things that go into it. We've been dealing with pneumatic air leaks on the steps. And again, that was one of the items that we spent a lot of money on, and the brake lines. Those have been repaired, but we're starting to see leaks again in the steps, which means our onboard compressor is actually going on and off quite a bit lately. The water tank leaks have been repaired. So that is good news for a lot of our compartments, but our compartments through over the years have had a lot of holes drilled in them and have vents. And we've now added our new extrication tools. And over this last rain that we had a lot of water leak into the compartments from obviously road spray and those types of things off the engines, or I'm sorry, off the tires. And so we're trying to figure out where those leaks are coming from with the multiple holes and whatnot that have been drilled in the compartments. The alternator is beginning to have some issue, and overall the age of the engine is really kind of getting to that point where it's past its useful frontline life. It could be great as a backup engine and or a training engine. The need for an additional Type 1 engine is essentially as that engine goes out of service, we are seeing that the OES engines, and we've discussed this, that's not really an option, are actually leaving the county. There's only 2 left in the county, and those departments have full intention of getting rid of those OES engines. So the likelihood of being able to borrow an engine or something like that is diminishing as time goes on. Again, having a backup engine would allow us to do some out-of-county assignments as in a Type 1 nature. And then if we have significant drawdown in the county, where we have our Type 1 engine, we also have an additional Type 1 engine where we could have our reserves come back and staff that engine when staffing levels are low throughout the county. That would give us added benefit in the community. This kind of describes, it's kind of anticlimactic, but it kind of gives you an understanding of what's going on with the engine.
Neutral, brakes on. It's not going into 4, it's going into 5, which means it's not engaged. The mile per hours are not up, which means that again, it's nothing engaged. No light indicators lighting up on the pump controller. So now the operation will be to take it out of pump again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up.
Neutral, brakes on. It's not going into 4, it's going into 5, which means it's not engaged. The mile per hours are not up, which means that again, it's nothing engaged. No light indicators lighting up on the pump controller. So now the operation will be to take it out of pump again, attempt another time to go into pump. If that does not work, the operator will have to move the engine forward, backwards a couple of times to get the pump to engage. Order, neutral, take it pump. Leave reverse. Disengaged. 2 lights. And 4. 9 mile per hours. That disengaged. How many attempts did that take this morning? That's the third attempt. Third attempt to get the engine to engage in the pump. Significant delays on the fire.
Okay, and as you can tell in that video, I hope that played well for everybody. But as you can tell in that video, the initial sounds, you don't hear the pump turning. Finally, when they get it engaged, you hear the pump engaged and turning. Why now? First and foremost, it's our increased lack of reliability on this engine, and the liability if the engine fails on an incident. That's kind of what we're concerned about. We had a situation the other morning at 4:17 a.m. where we were called out for a structure fire on 1760 Las Tablas, where we had a fire in the wall, and the pump didn't engage 2 or 3 different times. I was wondering why the apparatus operator was backing up. It didn't click in my head at 4:20 in the morning, but as we came back around, we were considering pulling hose lines, but the first thing you have to do is get the pump in gear. So as I came back around, I realized that the pump was not going in gear. If that would have been a really working fire, that would have created a significant delay. The other aspect is, repair costs, $14,000. Yes, we'd still have to do some of those repair costs to keep that engine in service as a backup. But the more significant thing is on February 1st, there's going to be a 10% price increase. Currently, we've got a rough bid on an engine at $830,000. On February 1st, that's going to go up by 10%. So it's going to cost us an additional $83,000, which would be $913,000. Also, the build time on engines right now are about 17 and a half months. So we wouldn't see this engine or pay for it until May or June of 2023. How do we do it? We have the 2.5 million in capital facilities funds with many projects on the horizon that keep coming through. Again, the engine cost would be about 830,000, leaving us a little over 1.67 million. And for the station expansion, we could phase the station expansion and to accommodate the current funding levels. So in other words, complete a certain part of it. And when more funding comes available, complete that portion of it. Asset replacement funding is critical and we should continue it. We've attached a spreadsheet on asset replacement to your packet. We can talk about that at the completion of this. Some of the options that we're looking at on the replacement of type 3, again, 7160, using the out of county assignments to augment those funds. 7160 is, again, a type 3 that would be able to go out on a regular basis. They're the more in need type of engine. So second, we could keep all 3 engines and again, use out of county revenues to offset the increased asset depreciation. We could sell 7160 when we receive the new type 1 and only have 2 type 1s. Keep all 3 engines and just fully fund asset replacement, whether we get that additional funding from out of county assignments or not. And then another option would be sell 7160, get a 1-ton 4x4 with a skid mount pump, which would be a type 6. Probably not a recommended option by myself, but I'm just throwing it in there. Continue capital facilities funding, redraft ordinance 2002-3, 2007-2 into a new ordinance that would offset the impact development of future needs. I wanted to put this in there to give you kind of an idea of, I won't go through all the aspects of it, but of what the difference are between the types of engines. A type 1, obviously, that's our workhorse of the department. It carries a lot of equipment and it allows us to carry a lot more gear, water, and pump size. A type 2 engine, very similar to a type 1. This was very similar to our type 1 and type 2s that we had previously, 7195 and 7185. A type 2 has a lot of the same complements and a lot of the same abilities that a type 1 engine has. It's got, as you can tell on this, it's got a lower compartment profile. So getting things in and out of the engine are a lot easier. A type 3 is a much higher profile. It's mainly for wildland purposes. As you can tell, the compartments are much higher. And it's a little more difficult to get heavy equipment out of that, just inviting the potential of a back injury if we were trying to take extrication tools or generators or something like that out of a type 3 engine. I've attached this. I won't go through it in too much detail unless the committee would like me to, but these are all of the items that we discussed that were committee options from the last committee meeting. I have attached these options and I'm willing to go through these as you would like. They're in detail, but what I would like to go through is option 2, just this middle part of it. that kind of describes what we've done on out-of-county assignments. And essentially, Templeton has gone out several times here in the past, as you can tell, with a different staffing profile. And again, I've been on some of these. I was actually the strike team leader on the 2007 ranch fire where they were out for 14 days. And there were no issues with that assignment. The 21-day in 2017, I guess there were some issues with coverage and a couple of things there, but they got through it. But it was also when we didn't have the same type of staffing that we have now. This is the OES rate sheet. I've attached that. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. And then these are examples of 2 local departments, 1 volunteer and 1 full-time, and their out-of-county revenues and their annual average. What we could do with that additional funds, first and foremost, is cover the asset replacement or asset depreciation accounts. Second, we can use the additional funds as surplus in our fire fund. That would definitely offset the negative spending that's described in the financial model. With that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. I do have questions, and Director Logan, do you have questions too?
I do have questions. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Director Logan, do you want to go first?
I can. I have a number of questions. With regard to the pump issues, do we have an estimate of what the cost of the repairs would be and the time that it would take to do those repairs?
So South Coast has given us a rough estimate, depending upon, and this is kind of like with any older vehicle, depending upon the severity of what's going on. It could be a transmission replacement, which would be somewhere in the $15,000 range. It could be a pump replacement, which would be in the $60,000 to $70,000 range. And a transfer case, which would probably be, another $10,000 to $15,000. So 150,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. Downtime, it's really hard to determine with what's going on with supply chain shortages and workforce, what the downtime would be right now. I've tried to get rough estimates, but again, your typical engine build just a couple years ago was about 9 months. Now it's 17.5 months. So it's very difficult to pin these guys down on actual timeframes on what it would take.
Okay. And then what's the number of miles on that vehicle, 7195?
I believe it's over 260,000 miles or somewhere in that range.
Okay. And the cost to replace the alternator?
I haven't gotten an estimation on that. I'm assuming it's going to be about $5,000 or $6,000.
Okay. I mean, because whatever direction we go, it sounds like these repairs are going to be needed anyway. Because
Correct.
if you don't have a fire engine, a new one coming for another 17 months, I'm not sure that some of these deficiencies will hold. So it sounds like we're going to incur some of these expenses regardless of what direction we go in. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think we could, depending upon what happens with the engine, we could limp it along until we get the replacement. And make determinations at that point whether or not we would want to invest that kind of money into a 20-plus-year-old engine. And just
issues, Tom, if you've got pump issues that are liability, which you're saying possible liability, I'm not sure we can wait 17 months.
Right.
true.
And even with the alternator, if that goes where you have no lights or can't even start the engine, it sounds like these are going to have to be done.
Some of them will, yes. Like the alternator, right now, we're taking it over to South Coast next week. We'll have the alternator assessed and find out what the amperage draw is. Again, with the 20-year-old engine, we're looking at, is it a wiring issue or is it the alternator? What is it? It seems to be an amperage draw right now. Yeah, so I agreed. Some of these things will have to be addressed.
Okay, the other question I have is you're under option 2, you list Templeton and the out-of-county assignments in the past in terms of number of days. But down below, as a comparison, you're showing a Atascadero fire and San Miguel fire with dollars. Do we know the number of days for San Miguel? Because that's probably a better, since they're similar in size. Do we know the number of days there against these dollars?
As far as the number of days.
I'm trying to do an apples to apples comparison, and what you've got is number of days, but for Templeton, but you don't say what the number of dollars were that were collected. Versus San Miguel and Atascadero, you don't have the number of days.
For Templeton, I don't have those numbers.
Okay, but do you have them from San Miguel in terms of the number of days?
Natalie?
Yeah, so actually for the Cuesta fire, I have engine reimbursement. So that was a 2015, was $5,440.
Okay.
And then I have a chimney fire. I don't know what that one is on here. That was in 2006. Well, we were paid in 2016, and our engine reimbursement on that was $1,520.
Okay, and that reimbursement is, it sounds like from the Cal OSE, is based on what they consider hourly, and the type is referencing the type of vehicle, or is it? Yeah, it is.
Correct. The type of vehicle based on an hourly rate, and the maximum is 16 hours per day. I know I've looked at some of the numbers in the past, or heard some of the numbers in the past. I haven't delved into them too much with Templeton. I've been involved with it in Atascadero, and some of the numbers, like for the Cuesta fire, I don't know what the commitment time was at the Cuesta fire. There, on the fire side, there hasn't been any documents to track that. But some of those numbers seem a little bit off as far as reimbursement costs on engines comparatively to like San Miguel, where theirs is pretty significant. When you're talking, and I see what you're referring to, hours. Let me look at this.
Yeah, I'm looking at their letter dated May 1st, 2020. And I'm assuming the rates have gone up, given that this is a year and a half ago.
They have.
So, so is it, if we do this out of county, do we have the option of at any time declining when there's a request?
Oh, always. Yes.
Always.
What happens is, for example, last year I was queried probably 10 to 15 times. Do you have an engine? Do you have a crew to be able to go out of county? We are really needing personnel. And unfortunately, every time I did some reaching out to our crews, and again, that was at a point where Greg McGill and Kyle Root had just left. We were in a transition with some other seasonals that left our department to go become seasonals with others. And so we didn't have the staffing. And what I have to answer back is UTF, unable to fill. And then that just denies the request on our end.
Okay. And so is it possible that when the request comes in, we can commit resources, staffing, and decline on the equipment?
No, when they ask for a request, it's a specific request. So it's either going to be a type 1 or a type 3 request, depending upon the need.
So given that we currently have engine problems, it doesn't sound like we would be able to begin this until we have the new engine.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely have to have ducks in a row to be able to have, again, on a type 1, we're going to have a type 1 incident in the city where we have a structure fire. We're going to have backup engines coming. Our type 3 isn't going to do anything really for us on a structure fire anyways. So sending the type 3 out and existing with our type 1 doesn't really change our scenario with a structure fire in the community.
So you would only commit the type 3 engine.
Correct.
Okay, so so let me ask you this in terms of the cost of purchasing a new engine. How many bids did you obtain?
Well, right now we've obtained 1 bid from Pierce, but we've reached out to KME. I'm drawing a blank on a few others. KME, Boise, a
Spartan.
couple other. Oh yeah, Phil's on. Spartan. What are some other ones, Phil?
You pretty much hit them out, the primary ones. Spartan, BME, KME,
And Pierce.
Pierce, High Tech.
Oh, High Tech. All of the costs are
Sufton.
essentially the same. There's not much difference with regards to the cost of a type 1 engine now. If we were to get a higher quality, higher level, more of a, for lack of a better term, a Cadillac of an engine, yeah, then we're talking higher prices.
Yeah.
But that's not what we sought to go for.
So I'm hearing that there were roughly 5 bids that you are reaching out for. But you've not
We haven't gotten bids. We've gotten cost estimates.
cost estimates. Okay, so those cost estimates you've gotten from 5 different vendors.
Correct.
Okay, and Pierce is the lowest of them?
No, they're all about the same. Bryden Newell, I see he's on. He's actually the Pierce sales rep, and he could answer some questions if need be also, but they're all relatively within a few percent of one another.
Okay, well, if the bid is going up 10% in February, that's a significant increase in my book. Let me ask you this. I went online and looked at Pierce, and because I think we've used them in the past.
Correct.
They have a lease program. Did you consider looking at doing the cost comparison between leasing versus purchasing, given that these engines seem to have only a lifespan of 10 years?
Well, so yeah, with regard to the 10-year lifespan, I think that's a little short. Most fire engines are well past 10-year lifespans. I know, for example, in Atascadero, we bought the type 1 engines back in 2003, 2004, and 2006, and they're still in operation, and they plan on being in operation for probably another 3 years or 4 years. So these types of engines, depending upon call volume, can last up anywhere from 15 to 20 years. There are some needs that need to take place and some repairs and those types of things. Like what happened in Atascadero, they did a refurb that extended the life, as what we did with 7195 to extend the life on it. But the 10-year mark, that's for departments more like LA City that are constantly running those engines, and they're running them into the ground. Atascadero does about 3,200 calls a year. We're doing just at about 1,000 calls a year. So it really does depend upon call volume and how much abuse you're putting on the engine. So
with the depreciation, I think this might be for General Manager Breltz or Natalie. Would the depreciation differ if we lease versus purchase?
Well, now I have a question along the same lines, if I can interject. If we lease, do we have to do asset replacement? So that's sort of the same
So
thing.
the lease option, if the lease is simply a financing tool, which most lease programs are, it's basically borrowing money and then you own the asset at the end of the lease period, then it doesn't really have an impact on our asset replacement program, because we would own the equipment at the end of the day and be expected to replace it. So basically the leasing is just as a financing tool. It would save the capital cost, the initial capital cost. But I do want to, if there's a different kind of leasing program, like where you're like I'll use the term, a layman's term, like rental, where you don't actually own the asset, then that would be quite a bit different.
I just want to jump in real quick. I would probably want to check with our auditors, just because last year there was a whole different leasing pronouncement on how you treat leases. And so I guess I would want to get an affirmative answer from them. Because I know with our air scrubber that we technically leased over 3 years for the, I think, sewer department, they ended up treating it a different way. So I just would want to get confirmation on that before I confirmed anything with you guys on that.
Yeah, and I didn't look at a lease because of what I think the general manager was saying is, I was looking at it from, we would not only have to pay on the lease annually, but we'd have to pay the asset replacement annually also, so which would kind of double the amount that would be coming out of the operational budget.
Well, I think it's something to consider. They do have, it's a leasing purchase program. So it is, I think General Manager Breltz is correct. It is a way of financing.
Yeah.
Can I just provide a little bit of background, because I think there's no issue that engine 7195, there's no debate that engine 7195 has some significant issues that cause us to believe that it cannot continue to serve as our primary engine 5 and 10 years from now. And that was not the thought when the decision was made 6 years ago to have an engine refurbished. We thought we'd have a 10 or longer year life out of the refurbished engine. But I wanted to provide a little bit of background on the issue of buying what's before you at this very moment is to access the capital funds to buy an additional engine, right? That's just one of because it's a small point, but it's really important as we start talking about the finances of the fire fund. Historically, and let's say the past 20 years, the district has maintained 2 large pieces of apparatus. 71 in the past, up until about 2 years ago, 7185 and 7195. And 7185, as I now understand it, was something closer to a Type 2 engine. It was a custom build that enabled that engine to serve both as a backup Type 1 engine or a structure fire engine, as a backup to our primary structure fire engine, as well as it was smaller and slightly more maneuverable. And so it was used as a wildland engine, even though it wasn't primarily designed to be one. And this next little part's on me. When the fire chief at the time recommended we replace 85 with what now is 60 and jump onto this CAL FIRE build with BME, I had understood that it was a replacement for 85, and we used asset replacement funds to purchase it. And only since it's been here, really since Chief Peterson's been here, he said, no, this is not an adequate replacement for 85. It cannot serve as a backup engine to 95. It's not a structure engine, doesn't have enough gallons per minute flow, and it's got another number of other deficiencies, a number of other things that 85 was able to provide that 60 cannot. So looking back, I think that maybe engine 7160, we didn't put enough thought into, could it serve all of the purposes that 85 was designed to, and it does not, or it cannot in its current configuration. But I think importantly, it's important to note that when we did the financial modeling for what became Measure A, that modeling did not include owning and maintaining and depreciating 3 large pieces of equipment. And when you use the capital funds, even though this wasn't exactly what they were intended for, I think we could, What you're really saying is that we've got a new, because of growth and call volumes and so forth and so on, we now have a new permanent need to have 2 Type 1 engines going forward. To own and maintain those 2 Type 1 engines going forward. And so if you access those funds to purchase this, you made a commitment. And I don't know if that commitment's 10 years or 50 years or whatever. That's a problem for another day, I suppose. But you make a commitment to own and maintain those 2 pieces of equipment. You clearly cannot use the capital funds to simply replace 95. So we cannot buy a new engine with capital funds and then get rid of 95. That would be a very clear violation of the Mitigation Fee Act. So it has to be a new additional piece of apparatus. Now that concept is supported by the AP Triton study that said we should be buying another Type 1 engine, and we need 2 Type 1 engines, which is consistent with what Chief Peterson is saying today. My concern really is that's a significant policy shift from where we were when we developed the parcel tax amount. And I would be happy to kind of walk you through how this decision would impact the operations of the fund going forward. I think that's an important consideration. It's a big difference between simply replacing replacing 95 and owning 2 pieces of equipment as compared to owning 3. Owning, maintaining, and depreciating in 3 in perpetuity. So that's really what's before you today is to have an additional asset. I think there's really nobody on the phone or on this meeting today would suggest that 95 can serve us for the amount of time that we thought it could when we made the decision to proceed with that build. And in retrospect, perhaps that decision was short-sighted. But at the time it was thought that this could work longer than it certainly has. So I think it would be important to kind of make sure you fully understand the impacts of this potential new, and I want to make sure it's clear. It's not a replacement. It's a new additional piece of apparatus. That's the item that's before you. It would serve, once it's here, as the primary engine for the general calls, or all call types except for wildland calls. But it's important to understand what that decision means to the fire fund.
I also think that what's before us today is not only exactly what you said, General Manager Brotz, but also realizing that engine 7195 is going to have, if you look at the worst case scenario, somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000 in repair costs, because as Deborah Logan or Director Logan pointed out, and I had in my notes too, is you can't keep running a engine that's got all these problems that you're listing as to why we should buy a new engine. And then in another section, you say it's costing us liability, so we're going to have to repair it to cover our liability. So I think too, we're looking at buying the new asset or adding a 3rd engine to it, which is a policy change, but also realizing we're going to have, I'm a rainy day person. You don't say we can only just repair the water meter for $5,000. We have to look at the realistic cost over 17 months. It could be up to 150, if not more, thousand. So I think that's also what's before us today. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I think certainly I think I want to make sure I state it in sort of my terms. What the chief's suggesting is that this engine, the most significant deficiency or the most concerning deficiency is this pump engagement. And I believe what the chief is saying is, that's a risk that he's willing to keep or willing to accept if it's not the primary engine on the department in its current state. Now, that's not to say that condition couldn't worsen to the point where it couldn't be kept, it couldn't be, or wouldn't need to be addressed at some point. However, clearly, so we're giving you kind of the Reader's Digest version of what's going to happen here if we buy another engine. We've got some analysis on the impacts to asset replacement, but just owning and maintaining 3 pieces of equipment is more expensive than owning and maintaining 2 pieces of equipment. So our vehicle maintenance costs are going to be higher going forward. And things like an alternator, absolutely must be repaired. Some of these costs are going to need to be incurred if this engine remains a part of our fleet. It's an older piece of equipment. It's going to have repairs. The repair costs are going to get higher as the engine gets older. That's just sort of, I think that's predictable. The pump issue, what the chief is kind of suggesting is on these assignments like structure protection or on training assignments, the pump engagement delay is not as concerning. The pump is always engaged, but there's been delays. Now, and that's concerning when it is such an essential piece of equipment. Those delays are less concerning in training exercises and less concerning in structure protection for various reasons. But at some point in time, it might fail. And I have not concluded that it's not worth repairing anyways. I mean, it's a, major, it's especially if this is going to be an asset that we continue to own for another 10 or 20 years, and anytime the primary engine's down for maintenance or any other reason, we're relying on this engine it needs to function as it was designed. But when you're ready, the committee members, we can walk you through the analysis that we put together to kind of, there's a couple, I think, some important numbers here. I just, again, want to make sure that you make a fully informed decision. And not that you're making a decision today, but a recommendation, if you want to proceed forward, that it's fully informed and you understand the consequences, at least to the fire fund. That being said, the option of doing nothing really doesn't exist. We must address either we dump money into the current engine and extend its life and it serves as a primary, or we focus on another solution like replacing both 7195 and 7160 with another complement. One of the challenges we have, with a new type 1 and probably some sort of a type 2 engine, the problem we have is we don't have the money to do that immediately available. The district didn't fund its asset replacement from about 2008 to 2013. And that is now, and that has been, and that's very, our hands are very much tied in that area for that reason. And that's why I'm so concerned about being able to replace these. If you buy this engine, we have to be in a position to replace it when its service life is up.
If I could, Director Logan, Chief Peterson had his hand up before you. If I could have control of the meeting. Chief Peterson, go ahead.
Thank you. And General Manager Brotz is absolutely right on his recommendation that what I'm referring to is that the engine has not failed to go into pump eventually. But my concern is, as a frontline engine, that when we pull up to a working structure fire where we have individuals trapped or something of that nature, that it would be the primary frontline engine in that situation, and it would have a significant delay in going into pump. That's kind of what took place during our open house. Actually, Director Peterson and English were there and witnessed what took place there. That was 4 different attempts to get it into pump, allowing the engine, or the vehicle that was there, to get much more involved than we actually wanted it or planned it to be. So those are the concerns I'm really referring to. In the future, in 17 months, if we choose to go this direction, and we evaluate that the asset replacement funds just won't handle 3 engines, and it's a situation where we have to get rid of a type 3 or refurb, not refurb, but look at replacement of 7195 with a type 2. I don't know if that's a change in or an issue with asset replacements, changing the type of the engine. But we could definitely look at something like that and pare it down to 2 engines again. So those are some of the options we're looking at. I think what I would, again, my recommendation prefer to do is get this engine coming in 17.5 months. Then we look at our, again, with the numbers that have taken place, look at the asset depreciation. If we have a situation where it's just not going to work, then we can actually sell 7160, sell 7195, and replace that with a factory built, not a refurbished or remodeled or something that has come out of the factory and now we're trying to change it type engine, but something from the factory that was designed that way. So I think there's a lot of options, you know, to the engine issue and to the asset replacement issue.
Thank you. Director Logan, you had something you wanted to state?
Yeah, so I just wanted to confirm, because what I'm hearing is that, you know, I don't disagree with some of the issues that have been listed for 7195. It's either we repair it or we purchase a new engine. And I'm not sure the repairs, if that's a viable approach, but I think it's also looking at leasing versus purchase. Because I'd like to see what that comparison is in terms of how those numbers work out. And if it's more favorable for us to lease versus with the option to purchase versus outright purchase. The other is that I just want to confirm that the recommendation of keeping 2 Type 1 engines, a new one, and keeping 7195 along with 7160 is really for the benefit of out-of-county services for reserve staff and as a backup to frontline engines if it's out of service. And given the numbers that we have for the out-of-county services, I'm not sure that it would be cost justified given the expenses of the depreciation that we would have to keep on the books for having 3 vehicles. So that's, so unless someone thinks otherwise, I just want to summarize with what I'm hearing from General Manager Brils and Chief Peterson.
Yeah, so with regards, and I just want to confirm that I'm understanding what you're saying is that you're recommending that asset replacements from out-of-county assignments wouldn't cover the entire depreciation?
I'm not sure it would, given what, I mean, it's hard to say, given that what we've got in past historical for Templeton is in a matter of days and not dollars. But then looking at Atascadero and San Miguel, it's in dollars, but I'm not sure that that's sufficient to cover.
And I could break those down into days. So essentially what you would do is you would basically divide the total amount by 16 hours per day on each one of those. That would give you the number of days. And I have the breakdown sheets. I should have added the days also. I apologize for that. But each one of those, particularly the 2020, 2021 for San Miguel, those were multiple day assignments. They were multiple assignments. So some were 7 days, some were 14 days, and they had a couple of 21-day assignments within those. Now, keep in mind, those are just engine replace or engine numbers. Those don't include admin fees. They don't include personnel costs, those types of things. Those are all paid for by the incident.
Okay.
So just, I think I can address the lease issue just quickly before, I think the lease, if the committee and ultimately the board wish to own 3 pieces of equipment and buy a new Type 1, then I think the use of the capital funds is an appropriate use and we should not consider a lease. However, if you dismiss that option and prefer to examine a new option that would include just simply replacing the apparatus, a replacement of it, then that financing tool might be or could be advantageous because we don't have enough asset replacement money to replace 7195 right now. And we certainly don't have enough money to replace it and 7160 with a new type 2 as well. So I think the financing mechanisms make more sense if we're not going to utilize capital funds and buy another engine. I think that's just an important consideration, that the capital funds are only available if you're adding a resource. It's not available. It's clearly not available if you're replacing a resource. It would be like a
Additional.
Yeah.
it has to be additional. Yeah. So again, you're starting to talk about some of these impacts. We did spend some time putting together a couple of little, financial analysis. We're happy to kind of walk you through that if you think it would be helpful.
I have a couple questions before we go to the financial analysis. I know that Chief is recommending that we purchase a type 1 fire truck. What is a type 2 fire truck less expensive or more expensive than a type 1?
I'd have to defer. I believe it's less expensive. I would have to defer to maybe Bryden Newell from Pierce on that.
Because in your comments and in reading the report, you said a type 2 is very similar to a type 1. And so if it was slightly cheaper in cost, therefore our asset replacement is cheaper. And yet you said it, to me, it sounds like the uses are almost identical. So I was just wondering in the difference on the prices of those two different types of trucks. So maybe Mr. Newell could speak to that.
Yeah, they're similar. I just want to clarify that. For example, the old 7195, which was the KME, that was a 1,500 gallon per minute pump. It had a 1,000 gallon tank. It had significant compartment space. It had a 1,250 gallon per minute deck gun. What's the monitor up top for commercial fires. So 7185, which was the type 2, had less compartment space, still had that lower profile. It had a 1,000 GPM pump. It still had the deck gun, but they're comparable, but they're not the same. So I just want to make sure the committee understands that there is a difference.
No, I figured that.
Okay.
But when you're restricted in funds and you're restricted in asset replacement, can we, do we need to buy the Cadillac when maybe the
ultimately,
Cadillac works?
Ultimately, I think that's where I'd like to get, is kind of back to that old model of having a new type 1, and then in the future look at replacing 7160 and the existing 7195 with a new type 2. So we would be back to 2 pieces of apparatus and not have to deal with the 3 pieces of equipment for asset replacement. But I'm just trying to figure out the best way to get us there with the condition we're in right now.
Okay, and then when you do out of county, you send servicing, you lose 2 personnel and the truck. Is that the minimum that goes out of county?
3 personnel. So essentially what it would be is one of the captains and 2 reserves and the type 3.
Chief, if I could, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, Bryden, go ahead.
Yeah.
So I think with the biggest difference between the type 1 that Templeton is looking for, it is a exclusive design that the type 1 that they will be getting has the ability to pump and roll. It is it's called the Puck, which is the Pierce Ultimate configuration, and it is very popular in Southern California with that ability to pump and roll, and also while having an enclosed pump panel for the firefighters to use as well. And type 1 out of county going on strike teams is much more popular than the type 2 going out of county. I haven't heard of any type 2s actually going out of county before. It's just type 1s and type 3s. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate that. I had another question before one here. I have a comment, although we've been sort of on questions. I'm going to make a comment, which is when we go out of county, Measure A was passed to provide services here to Templeton. When we go out of county, we're then potentially, not probably, but potentially shortchanging our residents here. And so when I was first elected to the board and Director Logan at the same time, the entire fire department came in and sat down and looked at us with, you know, dreadful faces, with their kids, with their spouses, all saying, you either needed to disband the fire department or get us more money. So we, and including Director General Manager Briltz and Natalie Clock and a few other of us, worked our butts off to get Measure A passed. And we promised the community this was for them. Now, I understand it's a fine line because we need this to service them, but I am concerned about sending them out of county should something to happen here. I have a friend who writes policies for CAL FIRE up in Sacramento. So interesting, because I ask her why she writes all these policies I disagree with all the time, for like, you know, width of fire lanes that need to be 25 feet wide and all this kind of stuff. But that's a side point. But she did mention to me that San Luis Obispo County was on their hotspot last year. They thought for sure we would end up, I can't say for sure, we were on their watch list as they thought we were going to have a bad fire in our county. That doesn't mean necessarily in Templeton, but that somehow we were kind of due statistically to have a fire here. And so I do have concerns about sending our fire department that we have committed to our residents here through Measure A out. I understand the money it brings in and how it would help us, but it is a concern of mine. And so that's not a question I went into a discussion, but I did want to point that out while we were there. If I had any other questions.
Chairperson Giardini, if
Yes.
I can kind of address that, at no time would I ever allow a piece of equipment or personnel to go out of county without having the district 100% covered. I think that's the biggest issue. Coming from Atascadero 17 years, we've sent 2 pieces of apparatus out in the past. Auto and mutual aid are dependent upon that system. So if we have a situation, automatic aid, mutual aid covers those types of deficiencies. With going out of county, again, like I say, we would never leave the community deficient. I'm a member of this community. I've been here 34 years. And that was some of the concerns in the past with regards to volunteer folks going out is, can we guarantee that we have enough volunteers to cover the community? So we would have to put people on standby as volunteers in the past to make sure that they were still committed to covering the community, because, you know, as with volunteer departments, you never know what you're going to get. With our current situation, we have 3 full-time captains and a full-time engineer. The intent would be to send out a captain and 2 reserves, and then the full-time engineer would cover the captain's position, so we wouldn't incur any overtime in that role. And then we would bring on 2 additional reserves. So the out of county assignment by personnel is paying 100% for that personnel, for the equipment, and we're getting an admin fee on it also. So it covers it.
So can I play worst case scenario? So you send out a captain and 2 reserves, and so does the city of Atascadero and the city of Paso Robles, because there's a major, huge fire in Fresno. And then something breaks out here. So we've committed over there for what, 7-10 days, whatever it is. And then
14-day minimum.
Okay, 14-day minimum. And then so has the city of Atascadero and the city of Paso Robles, because there's this huge fire. Then, you know, I have limited knowledge of how the fire department works, so I'm trying to figure this out in my brain. So then we have a fire here. Then city of Atascadero sent out their extra, city of Paso has, and so have we. So
we are going to get the same exact response that we would get even if they didn't send anybody out, because they're going to back cover their stations. They're going to have the same engine coverage that they would normally have. So if we have a situation here like normal, we're going to send our engine. We're going to get 1 engine from the county, 1 engine from Atascadero, and 1 engine from Paso Robles.
okay, so you're saying we'll be covered.
Yes.
Got it. Director Logan.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned it would be a 14-day minimum. Is that what we would commit to for out of county?
Correct.
So what would be the maximum that someone could be out of county?
21 days. That is the maximum.
Okay.
If you go to 14 days and anybody on that strike team assignment cannot fulfill or cannot what we call extend to the 21 days, then the strike team is disbanded at 14 days. So let's say, for example, I'm the chief and I go, nope, I need my engine back after 14 days. They have to come back. They either find a replacement engine for us or the strike team disbands and comes back.
Okay, does that mean the personnel comes back as well?
Yes, yeah. The
Okay.
personnel and the engine are tied.
Okay, because I think what Director Giardini was alluding to is, I remember very vividly, was when we had a situation where we were short of staff and we had firefighters out for 21 days, which left a tremendous strain on the department. And what we had were the spouses coming in.
And their children.
And their children. I mean, because basically they became a single parent. So I want to make sure that if we do this out of county, that one is that it's on a volunteer basis on the part of the firefighters willing to go out, and that it's not assigned, so that it's their assignment they're accepting. But also if there's a need back in the community, because I share Director Giardini's concern in terms of the optics of us sending resources out when we said the resources are needed here, even though it's providing revenue, and it's really the revenue is really covering our expenses. I mean, it's not a profit-making proposition per se. It's really covering our expenses.
It actually is making a significant amount of profit for, well, and I don't want to call it profit, but for the department, the expenses are covered on the personnel and on the admin, but the engine is actually making money.
So the engine, we get the money off of the engine, but the engine is being used as well, which I look at wear and tear.
Yeah, absolutely.
From that standpoint.
Well, and again, I'm sorry, may I interrupt, Director Logan, is that the amount, when we send them out of county, that's not a for sure thing, you know, and so we got to keep that in mind. It could be a good money maker, or it could not bring anything out at all. And I feel, you know, we have a fiduciary responsibility as board people to look at worst case scenario, because if you look at, you know, past boards didn't do asset replacement, and now we're stuck with that. So this board is very cautious, I think, in general about those kind of things. And so that's why we're asking these detailed questions. And I understand that, yes, it can happen, but I also have to look at worst case scenario where it doesn't happen. We don't get that money in and we don't have that funding then for asset replacement. That's my
Right.
concern.
Yeah, and that's, for example, as I showed in on the examples for Atascadero and San Miguel in 2019, that was a very, thank God, slow fire season, and they didn't go out at all. They didn't make any money. But that's why I also showed the annual average, because then there was the 2020 and 2021 years where they went out multiple times.
Mhm.
So I think on an average, it works out. But yeah, there will be those years that, you know, and I know fire service individuals can be a little morbid with regards to fires and whatnot, but it's one of those situations, none of us want to see these catastrophic fires. But at the same time, we want to be there to help if we can. And that's what firefighters do. They're all about the automatic aid. They're all about the mutual aid.
Mhm.
They're people that really just want to help, especially in these communities where they're getting ravaged by fire.
So I just want to, I think the policy of the out of county is a little off topic. I mean, I know it's a revenue source that can help. I can say confidently our folks generally want us to be able to allow the crews to go to out of county. It's experience, it's income, it's a number of things that we struggle to always provide here locally. You know, you recall that one incident where the folks were gone for 21 days. We really didn't get complaints from the people that were gone. What we got were concerns about the very small number that were left. And that's what really has prohibited us from being able to go since then. We haven't felt confident that we had enough people remaining to serve the community without having massive overtime. And back in 2017, we got down to several days where we had one firefighter responding to calls. It was really terrible. So the circumstances weren't so much about the persons serving on the out of county assignments, but the very few that were remaining here. I believe the chief is correct that our situation's better. I'm not maybe quite as confident as he is that we can always fulfill this, because you know, because I've been here through the days that we've struggled, and there are going to be times when we won't be able to fulfill it. But is there revenue out there? Yes. Do we have a track record? No. Is it dead reliable? No. Maybe over the long term, over 10 or 20 years, it can bring in a revenue. It can bring in needed revenue, but I don't know exactly how much. And again, we don't have a track record that says we're going to be able to do 28 days of this a year, or 14, or 35, or none. You know, we just don't know those things. But again, I think maybe if we get back to, because it's really just another revenue source. And even under the most optimistic scenario, it's not enough to fully cover the increased cost of asset replacement. So you'd have to find other revenue sources or cut other expenses to neutralize this entirely.
Thank you for that. I know Director Logan has a comment, or has been trying to get a comment in. And I know we went a bit off topic, but I think it's still relevant. So Director Logan had some comments.
Thank you. I want to go back to, you had made a recommendation that we change the ordinance. I believe it's 200-3 and 2002-3. And that references the fire department capital facilities charges. And it specifically says, shall be used for the acquisition of aerial fire apparatus. And is that the change that you're looking to make in this ordinance, is to remove the aerial fire apparatus?
Well, correct. And I think those two ordinances, and the general manager could probably speak more in detail on this, but those two ordinances are very specific in nature. And with regards to asset replacement or capitals funds, probably should have been a little broader with regards to adding additional equipment and adding funding for, such things as stations and apparatus and equipment. So combining those two, making it probably a little more
Discretionary.
Well, not necessarily even discretionary,
Flexible.
but not as specific.
With regard to capital expenses.
Yeah.
You're gonna, there's been some new legislation that relates to the Mitigation Fee Act that kind of is gonna limit just how, well, one, it will never be discretionary. The Mitigation Fee Act says that you could only collect capital impact fees or development impact fees for new impacts, one-time impacts associated with development. So it's never going to be discretionary. It may be, we may be able to define those needs as different. Probably the most significant need will be to redefine the need to, rather than build a new station, to remodel and upgrade this facility to accommodate the now identified needs that were identified in the AP Triton analysis. And then potentially eliminate the need for this aerial apparatus. But you really cannot work on those new development impact fees until the master plan is complete. One of the most important things that we are missing is a cost estimate for the station remodel. The apparatus estimates are easy to come by, but that conceptual plan and cost estimate is still, that's what we're working on now.
Yeah, that actually starts on Tuesday.
Okay.
With the architect.
Okay, thank you. Can you clarify something for me? The cost for improving the fire station, the Mitigation Act says for new stuff. So are you saying the fund that we have now cannot be used for renovating or upgrading the station?
Well, it can be used for expanding it, certainly. There are some, yeah. So I think that's important to reference the fire station work to be an expansion. Although I know there will be some other aspects to the work, but yeah, as long as its purpose is to expand the station to serve growing needs caused by new development, then
we're okay.
Yeah, it's not an ideal. I mean, our situation isn't ideal, but I think we can make it safe as long as we're careful. Now, you can't just replace the carpet. No, we're talking about adding bedroom space because we anticipate more firefighters being on duty at one time. We're talking about adding training space and those kind of things. I think those are safer options. Certainly expanding the apparatus bay, although it may not be a phase one need, would be a safer option because the current fees were collected based on the need to build another fire station.
Okay. Director Logan, do you have any more comments?
No.
Okay. I'm going to make some comments. And don't hate me, but I want you to talk me down off of this panic attack I'm having, okay? So this is what, when we go into the financial analysis, this is what I want you guys to calm my nerves on, which is, okay, to me, in my mind, it's better to have a fire engine to service our community because, and that but is primary to the fire station getting expanded, because if we spend money on the expansion, what good does it do if we don't have the equipment to service the people? So I agree with in my priority, purchasing the engine and spending the money there is number one. Although the fire expansion is needed, that's a higher priority for me. Number two is I feel like our back is up against a wall, and I know Chief Peterson and General Manager Brooks, this is not your fault, but I feel like, oh my God, we have to pay $830,000 now. We have it in capital improvements because as of February 1st is going up to $913,000. And I don't feel like we've had lots of questions on going out of county. We have lots of questions on leasing versus purchasing. We have lots of questions on that, deficit at the end of 10 years, how we're covering it. Chief Peterson, in your slideshow presentation, you said specifically, I wrote it down somewhere, that there are lots of developments in queue, but I don't have a financial analysis of them. And, you know, I know that certain water meters were purchased and they're probably not going to go into play. They were purchased as a defensive act, so nobody else would get them, so that they could remain site A for development. And so we're not going to see stuff coming in from that. And so I feel like, I mean, I want to support you. I obviously support our fire department. I fought really hard for Measure A. You guys are great. But I also don't want to make a financial situation or a financial decision because there's all of a sudden this February 1st deadline without having all the facts before us. And part of the facts before us is a really thorough analysis, such as what development is in queue, what's coming up, how can we promote development that might help us out, how if we do carry 3 engines forward, which is a policy change, how does that affect our 10-year profile? So I'm like freaking out over here, maybe not that bad, but I am concerned, and I don't feel, I don't like this pressure of having to make this decision or this recommendation today. And I see Director Logan wants to speak, and I don't mean to be histrionic over it, but those are some of the things that I don't know if we can have those answers. And I know we can say, yeah, we've got the money here, we can purchase this right out, straight out, but it has ramifications then for that fire station, and has ramifications on our asset replacement. So I'm a little uncomfortable. So talk me down off the ledge when you go to your financial analysis. And Director Logan has something to say.
Yeah, I just want to mention about that February 1st date. I think the February 1st date, forget, because any decision, it's really that this committee is going to make a recommendation to move forward to the board. So the next meeting, this won't get on the agenda until February anyway. So the February 1st date, don't worry about. That's already come and gone. And that's why I asked if there's other cost estimates, because you didn't get bids, but cost estimates. And I think we need to see those. And we need to see the lease versus a purchase, because we are short of funds. But the February 1st date, you know, it is what it is. And I agree with you. I don't like being pushed up against the wall and say, make a decision, because otherwise it's going to be 10% more. We have limited funds. We have to really be careful of how we go about funding this. There is definitely a need. I don't think anybody can say no to that. There's definitely a need. It's now, how do we fund it? And we've got to be really, really smart about how we fund it. Otherwise, this will come back to bite us down the road. So I think that's the issue before the committee, is what's going to be the recommendation that we agree upon in terms of how we move forward with presenting this to the board. And I know that, you know, if you think Director Giardini and I are tough on you now, wait till you go before the board.
Right, because I'm like the least financially astute person on our board. Director Peterson and Director Logan are very good at that. And so if I'm up on a ledge and you need to talk me down, they're going to be just as hard on you.
Yeah, don't worry about the February 1st date, because I think truly we've missed it. So
Okay.
it means that we pay $83,000 more, so be it. But
Okay.
The only
right decision.
Yeah, the only reason I wanted to bring this up was $83,000 is a lot of money. That's probably 3 years worth of asset replacement. So I wanted to make that very clear to this committee, and just present the option.
Unfortunately, this committee can't make the decision.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah.
And it won't get on the agenda until February. And I think it's February 2nd. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but I believe it'd be February 2nd. And by the time a decision is rendered, we've missed that February 1st deadline.
I think there are ways to meet the deadline, but let's see if we even have a recommendation out of the committee first.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot more information you're looking for. We're trying to figure out what you need, what information you need so that you can be prepared to make a recommendation. And I think there are still ways to meet it. But that being said, I would not encourage you to make a decision until the full board was comfortable that you've reviewed the analysis and you accept the risks and so forth and so on. So again, we've spent about an hour and a half talking about it so far. Are you ready to go through the financial analysis? Because I think your concerns are financially based. And so we do have this put together, and I think it'd be worth reviewing so that you can make a more informed decision.
So who's walking us through it?
So let me try to, I'm going to do my best. Let's see if it'll let me share my screen. And are you able to see a spreadsheet now?
All the way through column L.
Yeah, and then we've lost it.
Okay, good. Okay, so let me walk you through, and Natalie can answer some of the more specific questions. But the top of the cell that's highlighted says current SPF. Do you see that?
Yep.
Okay, this first sheet is based on the current policies in the strategic financial policies. The current policy that relates to asset replacement. So this first top of this top section, I'll say rows 1 through 12 are probably not that important for you to focus on. It's really providing some background on the existing assets the department has that are contributing towards depreciation. And so this first section, even going all the way through this spreadsheet, goes through year 2930. And the reason it goes through year 2930 is that's the last year that the 10-year financial model that was developed in 2019 goes through. So it's not arbitrary, it's based on those same 10 years. So this first section probably is not that important for you to focus on. This is already on the books. The decisions have already been made about the assets and how long they last, so forth and so on. What you can see in these first couple of rows, rows 5 and 6, are the asset replacement or the depreciation costs for the two large pieces of equipment that we presently have, 7195 and 7160, and how long they're scheduled to be paid on. You can see that 7195 depreciates through year 25-26, and at that point it's considered fully depreciated. So it's another 5 years or so. Probably the one piece of information that's important to see here is that the asset, okay, so just one item. If you look down on rows 21 and 23, you can see, and I'll highlight, this is row 21. This is the calculation for the current fiscal year's depreciation, $74,000 and some change. That becomes, by our current strategic financial policy, the asset replacement amount for the following year, 22-23. So that's six. Do you see how these dollars match? Just want to make sure you see how the worksheet works. So for example, this engine 7195 that fully depreciates in year 25-26, that isn't paid towards the asset replacement account that last year until the following year. I've kind of lost my sheet here. It's right here. This it's the year 26-27. So really, we're still paying the asset replacement on that piece of equipment until fiscal year 26-27, or through fiscal year 26-27. So that's 5 years from now. So for another 5 years beyond this year, we continue to pay on that piece of equipment towards asset replacement. So that's kind of how the worksheet works. What these new pieces of equipment here, or new assets, rows 15 through 18, this is probably where the model makes the most sense. This again, suggests that we'll replace the chief's vehicle in year 2023. It'll be depreciated for 120 months or 10 years, over 10 years, which has a straight line depreciation cost over those 10 years of $5,500. And so this models that out going forward. This model shows that a new Type 1 engine is purchased on 1/1/24. So arrives here. So 22 years from now, it's depreciated for 120 months because our current financial model suggests that vehicles are depreciated between 5 and 10 years. And I'll get to that in just a moment. We'll get to the next sheet. This has an $83,000 based on a $830,000 purchase price, creates an $83,000 asset replacement or depreciation amount. This model assumes that the fire station will have a $2.3 million expansion that'll be booked or finished 4 years from now and is depreciated over 40 years. That's based on the current plan. And then in 2030, that you replace engine 7195. So in 8 years, the current engine, the one we've been spending time talking about today, would be replaced. That's what this model shows. I think there are two things that are important to look at. Again, so those assumptions can change. It's easy to do so. These rows here, 23 and 24, are excuse me, compare the 10-year financial model that was put together in 2019 with the updated depreciation schedule or asset replacement schedule, I'll say. So you already know that the asset replacement lags a year. So, we pay it like the following year. So this row 25 is the comparison. So you can see under these assumptions, we actually create some savings compared to the model for the first, say, the next 4 years or so. But once you get to column L, when the new depreciation begins to hit on the new piece of equipment, we accumulate significant deficits against the model. Now, we spent a lot of time back in August going through the model and the model's assumptions. And so that, the further out you go, the less reliable the information is. And some things could look more optimistic and other expenses probably less optimistic. But if you were to add these all up over the model period, if you were to add everything in this row up, you'd end up with something like a $200,000 deficit. And so what that means is that you'd have to create $200,000 worth of additional money between now and the end of 2030 or fiscal year 2030 that ends in fiscal year 2030 to become neutral to the model. So we need another 200 grand to cover this additional depreciation expense during the model year. I'll also state that the real impacts aren't really shown until the following couple of years. Then this $70,000 deficit becomes more like $150,000 because the assumption is that you replace engine 7195 during fiscal year 2930. So when that hits the books, it increases the depreciation by another 10% of its cost based on this set of scenarios. So this deficit of $170,000 becomes again more like $150,000 a year going forward. So this shows that we'd have to create another couple $100,000 in revenue to become neutral. And then the problem becomes a little bit bigger, or maybe much bigger, the following couple of years. And keep in mind, the model already predicts a deficit, even without this increased cost. So I'm just laying out the facts.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
So just remind me, the funds for this come in through development impact fees and community facility district fees only, or do we get property tax fees too?
Okay. So the development impact fees cannot be used for anything that we're talking about in this model. This is all operating fund. So okay. It's property taxes, any fees that are generated by the fire department, reimbursements for things like out-of-county assignments would be included, and of course, property taxes, and then whatever portion of the CFD fees you assign would feed this. And again, I'm not comparing to, this really isn't comparing to the revenue, it's just comparing to what the model already showed. So this would create, this deficit would grow based on the purchase of the a new piece of equipment. And this,
yeah, I got that it'll grow. So the only way to offset it is by property tax and CFDs, or the minor would be the out-of-county fees and some income generated through the fire department. But those are our two biggest funds that would help us there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say on this out of county. We don't have much of a track record, but no, those could be more significant. I mean, I think that there could be years where the out of county assignments could come close to closing the deficit, but is it reliable enough, and would it grow fast enough? I mean, especially if you look out the following couple of years, which again this model doesn't show. Now you're looking at more like $150,000 a year deficit. So you know, it's really difficult. You're looking now 7-8 years down the road. It's hard to say. I mean, property tax growth could completely close this, but we just don't know. It's quite a ways away. Or it could, you know, and the model has a number of conservative assumptions, but not maybe worst case scenario, but a number of conservative assumptions. But nonetheless, the situation financially speaking, there's lots of other things to keep in mind, but financially, under the current strategic financial policies, would have the impact that's highlighted right here once the asset is on the books. The last thing, and it'll be much quicker when I get to the next page, but the last thing that this page shows in this section that I've highlighted here is the forecast for asset replacement funds. I mentioned to you early on tonight that one of the, tonight, geez, it's only 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm sorry, it's been a long week. And I've been on vacation. So that one of the real hiccups we have is the status of the asset replacement fund. You know, the fire department has to own and maintain pretty expensive pieces of rolling stock that could need a replacement much sooner than we think, just like we're talking about today. I mean, under an ideal scenario, we wouldn't be having this long debate. You'd see a balance of a couple $1 million bucks and you go, we didn't want to spend it right now, but that's what we should do. Let's order a new piece of equipment. And if you had $2 million in this column right here, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. We'd say the asset didn't last as we expected it to. We have the money in the bank. It's time to order a new one. That's the right call. But we don't. We have $311,000 in column H. That was the June, I think it was the June 30th of the current, last year's balance. So we have this fairly small amount of money set aside, given that each replacement piece of equipment costs, you know, nearly $900,000. That only is, and then furthermore, you have a policy that says in any given year you can only spend half of that. So this bolded number down here, the box that's highlighted in this entire row, is simply a 50% calculation on the year-ending balance that shows you how much money the policy says you can spend at a time. So if essentially our policy said we can only spend $155,000 this year, or you know, because that's half of what we have. So the idea of the policy was to operationally tie our hands and force us to save and never expend the full amount, because this is the insurance plan, right? This asset replacement policy is how you replace a piece of equipment that just fails. So that's what the current policy shows. These numbers that build forecast the increasing balance. So this is the beginning balance for the current fiscal year. This is how much money we were programmed to contribute. This is the sale of the piece of equipment that just sold here 2 weeks ago. And now this is the projected year-end balance, which means you can spend $210,000 of it. So about a quarter of an engine. So then you go to next year and the same thing occurs. Although this model picks up the expense of replacing a pickup truck at about $55,000. So that has an impact. It lowers the balance, so forth and so on. What this model shows, without getting into all the details, because it's all included here, is that the end year, you start out the year, that final year, 29/30, with 1.356 million. You'd add $188,000. That's the asset replacement contribution amount. You'd order a replacement for $71.95. That's a decision that you'd make 7 years from now, and that would leave you with $595,000. So if you compare this $950,000 purchase to the $688 that was available at the beginning of the year, you'd see that you'd have to violate the policy and spend more than half of it. You'd have the money in the bank to do so, but the policy says you can only spend half in the year. So technically, you probably want to amend the policy, or the board would have to accept that it was violating that quote unquote guideline. So the second sheet, this other spreadsheet that I'll bring up, says changing the strategic financial policies. So what this suggests is that maybe there's some of the policies that are not reasonable in the current set of policies, and that these are yours. You have complete control about how the strategic financial plan works or policies work. The most significant change, so the first half of this spreadsheet is like identical, right? The top half rows 1 through 12 or 13 are the same as the prior sheet. What changes here is these larger pieces of equipment. Instead of depreciating them over 10 years, they get depreciated over 15 years. Now, the chief mentioned that the service life is expected to be more like 20, and we talked about whether or not the policy change could go up to 20 years. I recommend against that, only because really the way our policy works is the depreciation schedule is lagging the decision making. And I'll use the 7160 as an example. We ordered that engine like 5 years ago now, 4.5 years ago maybe. We actually took delivery of it in July or August of 2020. So it didn't hit the books until the 2021 fiscal year, last fiscal year, which means it didn't create a asset replacement contribution until this fiscal year, about 2 years after we took ownership of it. So it's possible that you're not paying on the depreciation for the first year or two from when the asset arrives. So really, by having like a 15-year depreciation, you could be paying. You could, like in the example of the 7160, it would take you 17 years after you took ownership of it before you paid it down. So really, the 15 years has already become 17, although it's not divided by 17, but the contributions go 17 years out into the future. So that becomes a very real possibility. So I would be concerned about extending that longer. If that was 20 years, then really you're talking about maybe up to 22 years, and that becomes really long. So that's the most significant, or that's one of the changes. The other change in this that we did is we changed again, just for modeling purposes, we made the assumption that you said, well, the 50% forcing us to only spend half or not more than half in any given year is too restrictive. We think the policy should be changed so you can spend up to 75% in a given year. So that was changed here in the modeling. What this shows, if you make these changes as compared to the prior version of the model, is these deficits that occur each year are a little bit smaller during this period of time, but they'll last longer, right? You're extending the payment period. The same situation occurs in the years immediately following the model. This $42,000 deficit really becomes more like, 125,000, or we have to actually plug in the figures. It gets much bigger the following year when this new asset you buy hits the books, because now you're adding that as well. So these assumptions are again based on keeping three pieces of equipment. And three large pieces of equipment, and this pattern will continue. Now these numbers are smaller, they're more manageable, they don't total as big, but they still add to the deficit that you already project in the financial model. So it's a concern, and I want to make sure you're fully informed about it. And again, the numbers in the following couple of years would get bigger. But just like we spoke about a moment ago, that's 8 years out, and the projections in the model are only as good as the assumptions that were made. And you'll have to keep tweaking this or revising those assumptions based on property taxes and other things. And I think there's lots of reasons to believe that the revenue will grow faster than the model shows. But as we spent a lot of time on in August, we also have reason to believe that some line item expenditures will grow faster. One of the things that we haven't addressed, but I'll just clue you into it, is, for example, vehicle maintenance. We have the financial model includes a very tight budget. We've not been able to meet it over the past several years. That's been a line item that we've exceeded, and adding another piece of equipment will put more pressure on that line item. Now, arguably, when the equipment's new, it shouldn't have a lot of maintenance items, but Over time, owning and maintaining three large pieces of equipment will cost more than owning and maintaining two. So anyway, that's how this model works. And again, the probably key pieces of information are in row 25. And then, this was just illustrated to show this row 33 that you could conceivably save up enough money to replace 7195 in that last year. Now, originally the chief had put it in an earlier year. We didn't have enough money, so we pushed it out further. And obviously that real decision wouldn't be made. You're not going to make the decision on what year to replace that now. You'll wait until further out. And this is simply a way of modeling it. And there's a number of other assumptions that may not hold true in here, but they're probably fairly minor in the big picture. So Natalie and I are both happy to try to answer questions about how this model works. And obviously, if you chose to move forward and you like the assumptions that were used in this sort of second tab of the spreadsheet, then I would be recommending that this committee perhaps ask the admin and finance committee to study the assumptions and changes and determine whether or not that changes to the policies are appropriate. Again, because the policy doesn't just affect the fire fund, it affects everything within the district. One of the other items that's not modeled here, because I don't know how to, we haven't really talked about how to change it, but it's in the chief's notes, is this fire station expansion. He's got some notes about, hey, maybe you don't depreciate all of it, or you depreciate over a longer period of time, because when you do that expansion, you're going to be depreciating the growth, that additional asset will hit the books. And could you depreciate it over a longer period of time, or depreciate part of it, or only contribute assets to part of it? That would require some sort of other policy change. But on the books, anything that we book as an asset will be depreciated. You can't change that. We have to show depreciation on our asset list and our assets. We're required to report that. It will be the asset we add to the station. The work we do to the station will create a new asset or add to that asset and increase the depreciation calculations. This 48 months, or is that 40 years? Could it become 50 or something else? Maybe. We probably need to study that further to see if that's something that makes sense. And again, this is not a fire fund only set of rules that affects everything within the district. And so you'd want to evaluate its appropriateness to make changes district-wide.
Thank you for that presentation. I have a lot of comments to state on that, what you presented us. If it's okay with Director Logan, may I go first?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think you talked me off the ledge, to be honest with you. We're making assumptions, and we're making policy changes to our policy that are acting as safety nets. And so, if we decide that we move our 50% that we can use to 75% in a year for these expenses, that's a safety net that this board has put in place to make sure we don't get into financial trouble. And we can see when we don't do asset replacement, what that's done for us. I think, as stated before, we had some additional questions. One thing, and that I think this board, and Director Logan's going to have to lay on this, is I'm going to throw out thinking outside the box for bringing in revenue here. And so, we're looking at these assumptions and policies that are these policies are safety nets. We're looking at large deficits. And as you just said too, if we make policy changes, do they not only affect the policy for the fire department, but they affect the policies for the entire TCSD? So when I was reading this staff report for this meeting, I remembered back in 2020 that we had a client come to us, or actually showed up at the board meeting and stated that they have X amount of water units, and that our water units right now are at 565 gallons per day, something like that. I can't remember, Jeff could correct me. But that if we allowed for one water unit to serve 2 residences, and TCSD gave to the county for their housing element that one single individual uses, I think it was 115 gallons per day, or 113. It's in the housing element, our numbers we gave to the county. So if you do a studio, you are using only 115 gallons per day. If you have 2 people in a studio, you're using 230 gallons per day. So you could easily split a water meter. The calculations they brought before us was that there would be a one-time park fee of $330,480 coming in, an annual CFD revenue of $52,620. And over a 15-year period, the CFD and the park fee combined would be $1,119,780. To get that money, all we have to do is not change a policy that's acting as a safety net, such as the policies we have in place regarding how much of our asset replacement monies we can spend. All we have to do is look at facts and say, gee, a water meter can be split and you can monitor individual units off of it, how much they're using. And we could generate all this income with water that has already been issued in water meters to a site, and water that's already in our water buffer. And that's when I asked for analysis on how to fund things. I want thinking outside the box. I don't want just these kind of analysis. I want, and maybe Director Logan disagrees with me, but I want to see other options presented to our board, because this isn't solving it. This is making a lot of assumptions. This is making us change policies that are acting as safety nets. And maybe our board needs to realize that there are other ways of generating revenue and other ways of not sending us into these deficits. And so I'm not willing to go back to the board unless we have additional information that we've asked for in this meeting already, and an analysis of how we could potentially increase some growth in this area, provide the housing that's desperately needed, and make, a huge CFD revenue coming in every year, and over 15 years, over $1 million, which would highly impact this model here. And so for me, I want other analysis done rather than just this. You might get a split recommendation out of us. I don't know how Director Logan feels on this, but when I run my business, we think outside the box, and this model here isn't making it for me. It didn't talk me down off the ledge, and it's not something I want to take to the community. That's my input. Director Logan?
Thank you. We do have on our agenda in February the water buffer model, because I hear what you're saying. You're saying that perhaps our water unit, per single family dwelling maybe is overstated, and if it's reduced, it would release more water, which would bring in more impact fees. But that's assuming that there's development. But aside from that, that will be looked at in February. So that is on our agenda. But one of the things I wanted to comment on in this model, because we previously talked about, this model assumes that we're maintaining 3 large pieces of equipment. And what I was hearing is that really we don't have the budget for that. It's really 2. And so what I would like to see is, can we model it to say, we don't have 3 large pieces of equipment, we have 2. So when we've got 7195 comes in or is replaced, that we look at selling 7195. We keep our current policy, but even going with, I would like to see both of these with just two large pieces of equipment instead of the 3. I'm concerned about the out-of-county expenses because it doesn't seem like it's going to be a reliable or consistent source of revenue, one that we can kind of really anticipate, here's what we'll receive. The other comment is on this is I don't disagree with General Manager Brotz, is that I think the Finance Committee also needs to weigh in on the asset depreciation policy before it is taken to the full board for any kind of consideration if it is to be, if the recommendation is to change that. I'm not in favor of changing it because I just don't think it leaves us in a good position long-term. So I would, my gut tells me to avoid making that change in policy given the numbers. But I also want to see is, because I notice is that the fire station, do we have for the expansion, do we have the right depreciation numbers? So I don't know how the numbers were created for that in terms of some of the assumptions. So I don't know if somebody can speak to the assumptions that were used for these fire station, the expanded fire station in terms of the assumptions that were put in here for depreciation.
I can attempt to address them. I think this 480, both versions of the model show the expansion being depreciated over 480 months. So it's 40 years. That's what our current policy says for buildings.
Okay.
Okay, so that's that assumption. These 2 assumptions here could change. We just assigned a figure saying, okay, hey, if we were to move forward fairly rapidly with the fire station expansion, it probably still would be 3 or 4 years before it was totally complete. And it doesn't really hit the books until it's been completed. So this date could change. You could move it further out. You probably can't move it much closer because it's not realistic. And then Chief Peterson, I believe, assigned the $2.3 million figure based on some very rough figures that we got from our architect originally. Is that?
Okay.
Yeah. So if the station expansion is cheaper, then this number will go down, and if this number goes down, then this number will go down. But they probably are not material in the long run. I mean, if we save a couple $100,000, well, this will go down $5,000 or $10,000. It's not that significant one way or the other, as long as we're in the ballpark, because we're dividing this figure over 40 years or 480 months. It's a so that's why this number is good. The 480 months is good based on our current policy. Could it change? I'm not sure, but that's how that was arrived at.
Okay.
So that's that assumption. What I will say, without being able to repopulate this immediately, is that the short term, even if we keep 2 pieces of equipment as a permanent, I'm not saying 50-year plan, but plan going forward. What ends up happening is then you don't access the capital funds to buy the replacement equipment, because you cannot use the capital funds for replacement. So we'd have to figure out how to finance part of that new piece of equipment. The depreciation schedule shown here probably doesn't change a whole lot. It might even get a little bit worse in the near term, because you'd be buying, you'd be replacing 7195, which this already takes into account. But then you'd also be replacing 7160 with a type 2. That's going to cost more than 7160 did. So the depreciation on the type 2 is going to be higher. The benefits are going to be shown in the out years, the ones that this model really doesn't show. Remember, I mentioned to you that, this is concerning, but the real concern hits in the years that we aren't even looking at yet. That's when you replace 7195 with a new piece of equipment. If you don't do that, then this becomes sort of your figure going forward. It'll be a little bit bigger than this, because the type 2 engine will cost more than the type 3 did, I'm assuming. But it won't grow a ton more, right? Because you're only going to be then depreciating 2 pieces of equipment. Ideally, you'd stagger this so that one piece of equipment was bought in year 1 and the next piece was bought in, assuming they have a 20-year life, the next piece was bought in year 10 and so forth and so on. We don't have that luxury right now. We cannot limp along with 7195 for 8 more years, right? And 7160 isn't can't perform structure backup duties in a way that's necessary, especially when you have aging piece of equipment with known issues. And even if we didn't, even if those issues were resolved, I think it'd be concerning. The older equipment is going to have downtime. So that's what we have. But we can develop another alternative that shows what the impacts would be. The situation is, though, we have a very tight, we're a very tight budget. We don't have, the model didn't anticipate, even with Measure A, growth in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, potentially in new equipment costs. And so if you lease, let's say you lease a piece of a new type 1 engine, just without even talking about the lease terms, let's say that's leased over a 10-year period, that's going to be $100,000 a year. Yeah. So that lease cost is going to be on top of the depreciation expense. So we're going to have that new expense. So it's unfortunate. I take responsibility for moving forward on the purchase of the used City of Paso Robles engine and moving forward with its refurbishment. In hindsight, I'm not sure that that was the best thing to do, although at the time we were just trying to keep the doors open, and I still feel like that's got to be goal number 1. And then I didn't understand that the 7160, the Type 3 engine, was inadequate in terms of its service as a backup, and I understand that better now, and I accepted the fire chief's recommendation. And again, I don't want to pass the blame on anyone but myself, but maybe that wasn't the smartest thing to do if we were going to start running into some trouble with 7195. We didn't, I thought we had a lot more time using that as a reliable piece of equipment.
Well, hindsight's always 20/20. So let me ask you also, what's not here is unit 7145, which is the breathing support. And I know we've had problems with that piece of equipment, and that was purchased in 2006. So do we have a scheduled replacement for that equipment, or is that something, and I know that's used by other agencies, and I don't know how some of the expenses are shared with that piece of equipment.
So it's not scheduled here for replacement. It's not really being used for other agencies because we don't have the staffing to support it. Okay. That decision for us to house it was made when we were a primarily paid call firefighter model, and when there was a need for it, paid call firefighters showed up and took it somewhere. And now, if there's a need for it, we'll have to see if there's someone available, assuming it's in prime operating condition, and we couldn't guarantee its usage for other departments. So it does still serve a purpose and a benefit for us because we don't have an in-house stationary compressor to fill bottles and those kinds of things, but it's not, we haven't scheduled its replacement, and probably would not do so.
Okay. Thank you.
But you can see we're still paying the depreciation on it for a few more years.
Yeah, well, it's not enough to make a difference, I think, in this budget. So it's.
But if you, so the way the policy works also is if you sell a piece of apparatus anywhere within the district, the proceeds from that go to that asset replacement account. So for example, if we sold 7160, and we wouldn't do so right now because it's a needed piece of equipment, but if we replaced it with a Type 2 as one of the alternatives indicated, and we sold it, then any proceeds from that sale would go to the asset replacement account. So that would certainly help going forward.
So there's a lot of moving parts to this because I think what I'm hearing is 7160 is not our long-term piece of equipment.
Well, I think it is. I don't want to speak for the fire chief, but I think it is if we have 3 pieces of equipment. If we have a primary Type 1, a backup Type 1, then a Type 3 is fine.
Okay,
but it's
Or
not
type
fine
one,
if
type
we don't
two?
have the backup type 1.
okay.
Is that fair?
Yes,
So I'm
that's a fair assessment. And any regarding 7145, my recommendation in the future is that we do sell it. It's not a reliable piece of equipment for air fill. We're still constantly having CO monitor malfunctions on it. I've just got to work through the issues of the county fire chiefs and the grant that we received for it to be able to sell it.
Okay, so that's something that I think we should consider outside of all of this other stuff. I mean.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't have a material impact on any of the financial
It
issues.
won't have on terms of the depreciation, but it's certainly additional revenue. And I think we're looking for every nickel and dime we can possibly find. Okay. So ultimately, what I'm hearing is then we will want 2 type 1 and a type 3 engine. That's the ideal situation, or a type 1, a type 2, and a type 3?
The ideal situation would be able to have a type 1 with a backup type 1 and a type 3. The situation we can live with, if the finances don't accommodate 3 pieces of equipment, would be a new type 1 and a type 2.
So, okay. It doesn't seem like we have the funds at this point to do, I think, the ideal situation. I think it's looking at a replacement to our current type 1, 7195, and keeping type 3. I just don't know how we can fund it. I mean, because I don't like where we end up at the end of 10 years with this depreciation. I don't want to change the policy. I'm not in support of that because I think the numbers don't put us in a good situation in 2029, 2030.
So what I can tell you without having gone, we can do the analysis, not on the spot, obviously, but in the short term, in the next 8 or 10 years, the sort of backup plan that the chief just described is similarly challenging. We don't have enough money in the asset replacement account to do what we need to do. That's clear. It's similarly challenging, maybe even more challenging. It becomes more favorable financially in the long term because then you're paying depreciation and maintaining 2 pieces of equipment instead of 3. The model really doesn't even show that because it doesn't go far enough out. But that would be the impact. It would be equally challenging over the next 8 or 10 years, maybe even more so, because you're talking about. I mean, I'll tell you what we'll probably end up having to do is finance the replacement of the 7195. It needs to be replaced or repaired, and even then, the repairs it's not going to give it another 10 years worth of frontline service life. But not comfortable. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. And it could be up to $200,000 cost.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it needs to be, it's going to incur some repair costs just in the sort of waiting period, obviously. So you're talking about financing a piece of equipment because we only have $300,000 to work with right now, or 350. So you're talking about financing a piece of equipment, getting it here, and then I think selling 7195 for something that creates a new little cash fronting into the asset replacement account. Then you order a type 2 at X amount of dollars. Hopefully between the additional contributions that we've made, we'd be able to afford that without having to finance it. And then you've got depreciation on both the new type 1 and the new type 2, along with the financing costs of the type 1 over the next 8 years. I mean, it's going to be, in the short term, more financially challenging. Fortunately, the type 3 that we have has a lot of value because it's pretty new, but and could be sold, and generate some additional money. But we're in a tight spot. I mean, none of the options are good. That is more affordable long term, and I know I can picture how it works, and it's not something I can adequately describe to you. it would create savings, years 10 and 12 and 15, and those are important considerations, but it'll be even tougher in the short term. I was hoping that the modifications to 7160 could be a viable alternative and serve as a primary backup, but I see now why that's not desirable. It's difficult to modify something for a wholly different purpose than it was intended to serve, and it's not going to serve either its current purpose well or its modified purpose well. So a lot of compromises. So that's where we are. We're in a tough, Measure A didn't do anything for equipment, right? It only covered the new personnel costs. And
Okay,
what I'm concerned about is that you make a decision about equipment that has these long-lasting impacts, and you end up having to then reduce services down the road unless we were able to create that additional revenue where there are other savings to come. So I don't want to be. I just want to share the facts, the financial impacts, and you make a good informed decision and go forward. If you want us to evaluate what it looks like as a comparison to the sort of 2-engine option, we can do that. It will be worse in the short term.
so Director Logan, we need to talk for a second here. Okay. I'm an out-of-the-box thinker. We all know that. And so if they come up with a comparison for a type 2 model and run out the deficit we're going to run on that, and they look at having 2 engines, not type 2, having 2 engines with us, and look at the financial implications of that over a 10-year period. Then we look at having 3 engines, and look at what our financial outlook is on that, maintaining 3 engines. Why at the same time, I don't understand, can't we have a model as the poster child that if we change a water policy, a water code policy, this is the implications of the money it would bring into the department to have you look at and see if it makes a difference. Because what I see right now is that I'm really uncomfortable with is we're running deficits. We're in a severe budget constraints. Measure A dealt with staffing, didn't deal with replacement of equipment. And so we need to look outside the box, and we need to think of things that other ways of getting revenue in. You and I both appear to not like changing the policy of reducing how much money we can spend in the asset replacement fund. I think we're both in agreement. We like the safety net of that. But my personal feeling is that I would rather change a policy that doesn't seem to be based on facts versus a policy that is giving us a safety net. And for us to see the implications of changing that policy, they should run a model on what was presented to us in 2020 as a third option. Like, okay, if we made this policy change in our water code, this development could be spurred. It wouldn't draw down our water model anymore. And I know you're saying that this is coming up in February, but it's really hard. And you know for a fact, and I know for a fact, that every time I mention this, we have certain board members who just shut me down because I'm seen as pro-development. What I'm trying to accomplish here is to solve this financial situation before us. I am saying we had a person come to us. They laid out the things, and that when you take and you put a out-of-the-box thinking into a financial model and you show it to other board members, then reality hits of the good of it. And so I'm a little off taken by your comment, well, that's being handled in February, because you and I are on this board, this committee now, and it's our job to look outside the box. And so I really need to understand your position on that as why you wouldn't want that as a third option to be included in this, or maybe even to be brought before our board in February. I don't understand why we wouldn't look at that. And I think that's the hardest thing I'm trying to cope with.
Okay, and one is because if we change our water policy, the end result in terms of when we would see the additional revenue is not going to meet the needs now, because the need is immediate now. So it may fund long-term the issue, but that's kind of outside the scope of this committee to have that discussion, number one.
I disagree. I'm the chair. And what's on this agenda today is to look at financing and to look at our options.
Our water policy. So I think that it's something that can be discussed and would be appropriate to be discussed when we look at the buffer policy and look at what the usage is to say, can there or should there be a change? And if that change, what would be the end result? Which we then could say, the board could then say, can be used to allocate and some of these fire expenses. But I don't think that that's an appropriate discussion for the fire committee. I think it's an appropriate discussion for the February meeting where the buffer policy will be discussed. And at the same time, keep in mind is that it's likely that this will be coming before the board in February as well. So it would be appropriate to have that tag team then. I think for the discussion today, it's really looking at what's been presented in terms of, is there any other analysis that we would like? What I'm hearing is there's been 5 bids, or 5 not bids, but cost estimates. We don't know what all those 5 cost estimates are. The other is that I've pulled out from Pierce their lease policy. So I think we need to look at leasing. Is leasing an option? And it's not to say that we don't address what you're bringing up about water. We can. But I'm saying is that there's other things that I think are within the scope of this committee that can be immediately addressed and brought back to both the finance committee. Well, I think we're saying the finance committee, I think we're saying we're not going to change the policy for depreciation, but I would also want the finance committee to take a look at this as well. And I know you serve on that committee with Director Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, at this point, I think it would be not appropriate to have any kind of analysis done where we're looking at a change in water policy to fund this. Because I don't think that that would be an approach that would be supported by the board, knowing all the other board members. And you're right, this is a hot topic. It's a hot button. So I think it's looking at the water buffer model, which, what I'm hearing, I've heard in the past, could be favorable, which means more water released. I mean, if you recall last year, we released 25 units. So, we've made a lot of strides in water, but we have to be cautious there. But just releasing water units doesn't guarantee revenue into the district. That only
I'm not releasing water units. Those water units are.
So
I have the floor, General Manager, just for a second. Okay. And I'm going to make the call that this is in this committee's ability to speak about, because you brought to us today a financial forecast. And so the thing is that it's not the water that is out there is not releasing new water. It's saying that the water meters that are out there, or it's a change of code of, instead of having 575 or 375 gallons per day go to a studio apartment, it would be the realistic factual things. The problem is, as I see it, Director Logan, and as I know it, is that if I speak up during the water buffer policy and explain this in detail, immediately people turn out. You know that, I know that. If we take and we input a hypothetical out of the box thinking into a situation just as this, and I don't know for certain it's going to cure it. It's something I want to see. And you're right, it doesn't solve it in the immediate, but we're looking at a 10-year forecast. And so I think it's something to look at as far as a solution that could help us here. And we know that the CFD funds, if new development goes in, that creates new CFD funds, plus property tax goes up. And so, you know, the behavioral health hospital extensions died. That property is now being looked at. And so, yes, it'll be 2 or 3 years, but right now the property tax we're getting up there is what, 20, 30,000? It's on a vacant piece of land. The same with the Philipponi piece of property. You put development there, your property taxes go up, which then helps our rec department and our fire department. And so I am trying to solve our fire department's problem with all my heart, with all my heart. You and I walk together to get Measure A through this. I have the fire department's back. I don't want to see them fail. I want them to have all the equipment that they need. And they're firefighters, they put their life on the line. We committed to this community that Measure A would handle it. And so I feel like we need to look at things that would help them out, that we're not just focusing on today, because everything I hear out of General Manager Briltz and everything that's been told us in our discussions is we're still coming down to, this is a tight budget, it's a scary budget, we don't know, we're making assumptions, we're going to have to do major policy changes that are our safety net. I'm not comfortable with any of those. And I want to show our board how a change in the water code could potentially save our fire department in the long run and increase property taxes, which help then our rec department and us. I have good intentions.
I don't disagree. I know your intentions are good. I know you fully support the fire department. I think that the issue that I see is that it's immediate. And if we were to say, let's change the water units, the baseline, I think it's 575. If we were to change that, what are we basing it on? And that's why I say we need that water buffer model to say, what should it be? It may not be 300, maybe it's 250. We don't know, or maybe it's 400. So we need that water buffer policy to say, what should it be? Do we make any changes? So I understand it's a hot button, but I think we need to look at the model in February and say, is there a change that we want to make to bring in additional revenue to the district? But for now, I think we need to focus on is what do we have? And I think any decision we make, we're not making a decision for 10 years, because I think this is going to have to be revisited again in a year's time, because things will change. So as things change, you have to check your assumptions and to say, you know, maybe we say we go with just 2 main pieces of equipment, and we will wait 3 years to have 3 pieces of equipment. I think we've got it. This is going to be continuing to evolve, but I think we've got to go with what do we have today, because development takes time and we don't get paid until that development occurs. So that's my point. So I don't disagree with the points you're making, but I think that that's a more longer term situation and strategy I think we need to deal with right now.
Okay, so saying that, okay, let's say we're dealing with what's right now. How do you show our board then how additional, and this is for General Manager Briltz too, is if you give them an example of during the water board policy meeting in February of how if we changed our water code, this would have this kind of effects on this particular issue. It becomes a reality. And it shows how it could help it in the future. Because if I bring it forward and we don't have an example, it will get shut down by definitely 2, if not 3 other of the board members. And so I think we need to show them, and again, I'm not positive it would help, but look at the implications of what a change in water policy would do to help the rec department and help the fire department, because right now, all they hear is Pam wants to promote growth. Pam wants to use up our water. And that's not the case at all, because that water is already allocated. It's just, do we give it to 1 unit or 2 units? And so that's my point, is that I think this is the poster child potentially for showing our board how a change in water policy, water code could benefit the fire department and the rec department with an actual thing that we're in charge of in our responsibilities. And maybe it doesn't make any difference at all, but I think that we should charge our general manager with coming up with that financial forecast.
So General Manager Briltz, do you have some comments here?
I just wanted to request a short break to use the restroom. I can address the issues later, or in a moment, if you don't mind. I think several of us need to take a break.
Oh, it's
okay. So why don't we adjourn until 11:40?
All right. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. To be 11:40. I show the time to be 11:40, and I believe General Manager Briltz wanted to have the floor at this time.
Thank you very much. Just two very quick comments on some of the items that were being addressed just immediately before the break. One, while we provided 2 scenarios on the financial modeling, the one with strict adherence to our current strategic financial policies, and the other, I mentioned a couple of changes that would be necessary. Those changes, I would not describe them as extreme, and particularly the depreciation on large pieces of apparatus being moved from 10 years to 15 years. I still think it's a conservative approach. So I'm not overly concerned about that potential change. Although obviously it should go through the proper course and be studied further by the board, et cetera. So I don't think they're major change. That policy change would be described as major. Secondly, just again, a reminder, I feel a duty to just explain this to you. I only provide advice, and the committee members and the board members make the decisions. But when you consider what kinds of topics you want to address under this agenda item, I would just ask that you read or review how the agenda was written. And I'm very comfortable with the board or the committee discussing the financial impacts of this potential decision or various options relating to it, including that the CFD is a potential funding source. That is a way that we could purchase or increase the apparatus. However, I don't believe a member of the public would have read this description and think that there would be any substantive discussion on water policies. So I advise the committee members from engaging on any substantive discussions on water policies, although I don't have a problem, or don't think there's a concern about the CFD impacts to the purchasing decision. Those are my only comments. Happy to answer any questions.
But the only way you can increase your CFD fees that then are allowed to be discussed SBI discussing how those CFD fees can be increased, which leads us to the water policy. But anyway, mute at this point. Let's move forward. The goals, as you stated when we first started this meeting, was to look at the financial analysis, and that then we would be bringing a recommendation to our board. I think both Director Logan and myself have brought up some concerns that we have regarding the models, and wanted more information. And so I think at this point we would probably hold another meeting, having the additional information brought back to us.
So if I understand the second concept that isn't modeled here. So again, let me just step back for a second. What's modeled here, or at least financially speaking, I'm only, there's a lot more to this than the finances. I think the chief tried to outline some of the concerns about the current pieces of equipment and reliability issues, et cetera. And I think you all understand some of the needs that we're facing. So it's more than just the financial aspect, but what's modeled here is the purchase of a new additional piece of equipment and how that affects things going forward for the next several years. What's not modeled here, and what I think the committee is interested in, is the option of maintaining just two pieces of equipment and how that might look differently. And is that what you're asking for? Is we come back with like a comparison of how that might look? And the reason I asked, I want clarity on that, is we can put that together. We'll make certain assumptions, obviously, about how that would work. I think in order to see the differences, you'd have to look beyond 2930, because the benefit of owning two pieces of equipment won't show up financially in that first 8 years. As a matter of fact, it might be more expensive for the first 8 or 9 years because we'd be paying, in all likelihood, a financing cost as well as the depreciation costs on a new piece of equipment. It will have long-term savings, beyond 2930. And I think, as I mentioned before, if the impacts were only those that we've modeled, there's a certain amount of risk there, and it doesn't show things improving, right? Or that there's a bigger deficit than we would have anticipated otherwise. But the real challenge is in the years beyond that, when you're then replacing 7195. Again, accessing the capital fees creates a requirement of essentially maintaining that going forward. You cannot use the capital fees to replace equipment. That would be a clear and obvious violation of the Mitigation Fee Acts. We can't do that. We've got to add, if we're going to use those funds, it's got to be for something new and additional. So that's what's shown. If the committee members want an alternative, I think we could piece together a similar model that would show the impacts of buying, basically replacing what we have with a type 1 and a type 2. Again, that's what the chief described as an adequate backup plan. It's not as ideal as having two type 1 engines and the type 3, but it better protects us than what we have right now.
So Director Logan would need to agree to this. I think the other information that we wanted was looking at a lease option for a fire truck.
Yeah, I think that would have to be included in this second alternative, because we don't have the money in the asset replacement fund.
Right.
I could probably present both options. Both, what's not shown here, we show the asset replacement fund because that was, I think, critical to your understanding of how the depreciation that gets impacted. But we do have cash in the fund, in the fire fund. It is, just give me 1 second. The fund. The fire fund has an estimated ending balance of about $530,000. So you may have the ability to cash finance of this. There are other risks of all of these decisions. One being, if you remove that cash, now it's not available for prepaying PERS costs or some other things that are also under consideration. This is I think as we all know, the fire fund is in we went after Measure A because the fire fund didn't have a much of a budget to work with. And so there may be an ability to cash fund a purchase, but all of these things have some options. So we could, if the committee is interested, we could run maybe two more alternatives. One showing trying to cash finance a replacement of both pieces of equipment, and the other being to incorporate a lease into maybe the first piece of equipment that we would replace, because we don't have enough cash clearly to do both. If we're talking about replacing both pieces of equipment, we would generate some money by selling what we own, but it would not offset the purchase cost, or perhaps even come close to offsetting the purchase cost.
Okay, and then the other thing I think that both of us brought up was the cost of repairs because of the current engine, because I get on one hand, we need to do these repairs. On the other hand, well, maybe we don't need to do them, but then on another hand, it's three hands, but so maybe on a foot, that we have a liability when we show up. And so, a little bit more detail on that cost of repair. I'm a person who looks at worst case scenario. So, I would prefer to look at potentially all the things that need to be replaced. We may not need to do them all up front, but I think both Director Logan and I kind of agreed that the cost of repairs on the current engine was a little bit too nebulous for us to get a grip on at this point. So I think that needs clarification too.
I can try to put it in the way I understand the way Chief Peterson's explained it to me, and that is we wouldn't know the cost of the repair until we committed to doing the repair. It would go to, like, the first item might be the transmission, but there's no guarantee that that's going to fix the issue. Really deals with the way the engines, and again, this is just my simple layman's way of describing it. The engine, the same engine that powers the wheels to drive the fire engine, powers the pump. It has to shift into another gear essentially that's allows it to power the pump, and that's what's causing the problem. When it shifts into that gear, it doesn't align with the pump. So it's likely a transmission problem, but it might be a combination of both a transmission problem and a pump problem. And so we may not know what the final cost of the repair is until we're already $20,000 into it. Is that a fair statement?
Correct. Yeah. So essentially, as the general manager was talking about, is until we get into it, we don't know. And that's part of the problem. As you mentioned, there are three components to this: the transmission, the transfer case, and the pump, and then the electronics. So 4 elements. Once we get into it, it could be $10,000. It could be $100,000. We just don't know.
So I think we know that we need to know then the range. If it's all those 4 components, it could be just one of the 4, or it could be all 4.
Correct.
So the range could be 10,000 to 100,000. So I think we just need to know what that range is, because then we may say, based upon those numbers, let's go middle of the road and say 50,000. Or we may say, let's go, 75,000 and anticipate that being the cost. And maybe it's less, in which case we were overly conservative in our estimate. But I think we still need to know what that range is so that we can, because ultimately, if we keep it, we have to make those repairs. The alternator, I mean, if that goes, you have to make the repair.
Correct.
So I think we need to know exactly what are we talking about, because there would be best case and worst case scenario, but we need to know what's that look like.
Yeah, I can put something together like that. It's going to be very, like you said, a very wide range. Additionally, the recommendations from South Coast, the mechanics are, how much do you want to continue putting into a 20-year-old engine? Yeah. Because you could make these repairs and then that could crop something else up.
Well, and that's a good point. And it's like, that's what we know today. That's not to say that something else is going to go awry with 7195.
Correct.
That's going to add another 30,000. So, at some point, but I think what we've got to know is, what are we looking at right now? Because that's what we know is wrong. And what's that range? because I think this decision still needs to be made, you know, when it goes before the board to say, do we just sell it and go with 2 pieces of equipment for the next, you know, 3 to 5 years, and then look at adding a 3rd piece of equipment in year 5? So that's where I'm kind of thinking, you know, and if 17 months, I'm assuming if it takes 17 months for a new engine, that you as a fire chief, Tom, are comfortable with having 7195 go without having those repairs made in anticipation of having that new fire engine. But at some point after getting the new engine, is it really worth kind of maintaining the cost of that existing fire engine?
I'm sorry, and you mentioned, am I comfortable with going 17 months without making the repairs?
Yes.
No.
No.
Okay, so you're saying that those repairs have to be made simultaneously while we're waiting for...
Depending upon the level of involvement in the repair, correct. Yeah, I'm honestly not with they just left me a note on my door during this meeting that the engine didn't go into pump 4 times as they did the checkouts this morning. So again, as general manager said, it has not failed to go into pump yet. I just look at this from the aspect of as a fire chief and as a community member, if that's showing up first in, first due, it makes me very nervous to have to sit there for potentially 2 minutes to try and get that thing into pump.
And do you account for that in your response time?
No.
Okay, so
the 2 minutes.
well, yeah, I mean, while you're waiting to, I mean, because you're there, but you're not able to do anything if that pump's not engaged.
Right, correct. And that takes,
downtime.
well, that takes the engineer out of service basically to hook up the water from the hydrant to the engine because they're still dealing with the pump. There's a lot that goes into the engineer's job with regards to plumbing from the hydrant to the engine. But the first thing that they do when they arrive on scene of a fire is they engage the pump on the engine. So if that takes another minute, you know, a minute 30, whatever it is, to engage that pump, it just sets them that much further behind in a life rescue situation.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then, so once the other aspect I think that we need to look at is, so once we look at these 2 options and the lease option and the cost of repair, then also what monies do we have left over for the improvements to the fire station itself too, which I think it will be a deductive number.
If I could, the other options would not access the capital funds. So the options you talked about, if we're only going to be maintaining 2 pieces of apparatus, 2 pieces of large apparatus, let me just put it that way, then you wouldn't access the capital funds. And so in effect, more money would be available for the fire station expansion because you wouldn't be using it for apparatus. So, there's the trade-off, good or bad. So we'll provide some other analysis to you, but it will affect just the operating fund because either whether it's a lease or it's cash financing, it affects the operating fund. The capital fund could perhaps loan money to the operating fund, but either way, it has effect. The operating fund has to pay it back.
Okay.
So yeah, I understand. I think we can come up with a couple of other options for you to kind of look at that would incorporate, whether replacement, order of replacement of both pieces, and how much money we'd get back in, and we could do some analysis. Again, I think in order for it to be a valuable comparison, I would need to extend the analysis that we already did, because you'd want to look beyond the 8 years, because actually it's going to be more difficult early on to do the replacement because you're not accessing the capital funds to do so.
Yeah,
But-
I would agree with extending it more than 8 years for your analysis. Maybe somewhere between 10 to 15 years.
If I could interject and ask the committee if they have any questions, and so I could allow Bryden Newell from Pierce to log off if he needs to go. If they have any questions for him, he may have some information on lease purchase or something of that nature. Does the committee have any questions for him?
I think if he just provides information to you regarding the lease purchase options, and he's been so patient to be on this for going on for 3 hours now. Thank you, Bryden. But I don't have questions for him unless Director Logan does. Apparently
No,
not either.
I don't have any questions. I've not been able to read through what I got from their purchasing program, but I think that if I do have questions, then I'll filter them through General Manager Briltz and Chief Peterson to pass on to the Pierce representatives.
So I just will interject really quick and thank you guys for having me today and letting me join in on your committee meeting. But I did reach out to our leasing agent through a company called PNC. That is who our parent company, Oshkosh Corporation and Pierce Manufacturing goes through. And she said, the representative there said she would hopefully have some leasing information based off a 10-year lease agreement late next week, I would think, if not the beginning of next. And lastly, just referencing what's going on in the manufacturing industry right now is that we are seeing, I don't want to say uncertainty, but just with regards to price increases. This 10% increase is based on material surcharge as well as Pierce itself having their annual increase. Material surcharge is happening due to the unprecedented times with aluminum, steel, all materials that go into a fire apparatus. And so in speaking with Captain Goldblum and Chief Peterson, we began these discussions probably about 6 months ago in regards to, well, actually probably a little bit more than that, in regards to a new type 1, just to get it so you guys have it in your possession to see what the build would look like. So this build that the chief is proposing is based off a previous unit that you have now that is running on 20 years old, I believe. It would look a little similar, at least with the body, but the cab is going to be different in regards to the way it's a different cab than the previous unit now. But with this build going forward, after February 1, we believe that there is going to be more material surcharge prices involved with that due to the climate, I should say. And every manufacturer is dealing with these and nationwide. Let's see. Another thing in regards to the payment, I know that that you guys have been discussing that. This would not have to be paid off until roughly the end of maybe summer of 23, fall of 23. So there is time that you would be able to discuss other avenues and ways to go about how the payment would be done. And then there is that leasing option as well, to where you guys, the leasing would not start until the receipt of the truck. So there are options and avenues for that to happen. And the only thing that is needed from the committee and the council would be a purchase order, which is essentially just saying that Templeton Fire Department agrees to, I won't say agrees to the build of the truck. No money has to be put down. It is an agreement between the city and South Coast Fire Equipment that Pierce Manufacturing will supply a Type 1 fire engine built specifically for Templeton Fire Department. This build is actually a combination of a couple other units down here, and Captain Goldblum and Chief Peterson and I have been working through that. And then also, if you guys have any other questions in regards to our service shop that is there, that's kind of what has the Paso service shop, I should say. That's kind of what has helped us in SLO County and Upper Santa Barbara County with the servicing of apparatus. I would say that's definitely been a big help in regards to us being able to be better placed in regards to the competitors.
Yeah.
And lastly was the service of the engine with similar, or the serviceability of the engine. We've seen similar builds to what you guys, to departments like yourselves. Your engine lifespan would be easily 15 years of frontline service and then potentially another 10 years in the reserve status. Similar to City of LA, like the Chief Peterson had said earlier, they're running about 10 years. And that's going 100,000s of miles on those units. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, thank you for that information, that additional information. I did write it down. Unfortunately, as Director Logan said, our next board meeting, it's not on the agenda for this coming one, and the next board meeting would be in February. So doesn't look like we'll have answers or the ability to do a purchase order agreement by then. Yes, Director Logan.
Yeah, I have a question. For if we were to choose to lease as opposed to buy, would Pierce be able to deliver the fire engine sooner, or is it the same delivery time frame?
It would still be the same delivery time frame. There is whether leasing or standard purchase lead times. That is another thing. The lead times for fire trucks is going to only increase after February 1. There is going to be a very large backlog of fire apparatus because Pierce sells to the entire nation, and this price increase is hitting every state that is going to buy our fire trucks. So it could get to the point where we see 2 years potentially on a custom fire apparatus.
Understood.
Type 1.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
So thank you guys for having me. I appreciate your time. If you guys have any other
Brian.
questions, feel free just to let Chief Peterson know and he can contact me.
Great, thank you.
Thank you guys.
So I think one of the other follow-up items that haven't been mentioned is if we were to lease as opposed to buy, is there, what would be the depreciation on the lease? Because I believe this is a lease purchase program. But I think if we could see that modeled out, if he's saying the lease is over 10 years with the first payment at delivery, what would the depreciation on that look like as well?
Yeah, I think we can model that. Natalie we'll confirm with the auditors how the depreciation would hit, but it's a financing tool. The lease is just like a loan. It's really just another way of financing it. You're going to own it. And so I don't think it would be very different as far as the asset replacement impacts. We'd obviously have to forecast and model out the lease payments.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly we're not having to come up with the full payment at delivery. And that's what I'm looking at is we're able to spread it over 10 years. There's probably some cost associated with that. But if we can spread it, since we don't have the funds right now, that's what I'm looking at is how we can make it happen. So.
So we'll develop at least, it sounds like there are 2 or 3 other alternatives that you want to look at. We'll extend the existing model a couple more out years so you can see the impacts in the years like 30, 31, 31, 32, those years. And then we'll be able to compare it to these other alternatives. Again, because the savings probably don't occur until the years, till 12 or 15 years from now under the other alternative. If we don't access the capital funds, then we'll have another impact to the operating budget on the purchase side as well as the asset replacement side. So, but that's something we can put together and get back to you. Again, So just to kind of close it, it sounds like the committee wants, before we move on to the next item, the committee wants to look at some other options. You know, I did bring this for this committee meeting now because I think if you, not that you are, but if you were ready to proceed, I think we could have beat the February 1st deadline by holding a special meeting of the board. It doesn't sound like the committee's prepared to make that recommendation. And I'm good with that. I mean, my goal is to make sure that you're fully informed when you make the recommendation, and ultimately the board makes the decision. But that's you know, why this item was brought before you now.
I realized that we could have a special meeting of the board and go ahead with the purchase order, unless you model stuff out and see something that would satisfy both Director Logan and I, and you want to hold another fire committee meeting quickly and then go to an emergency meeting. That's always an option on my plate that we could have, because it does save $80-some thousand. But again, both Director Logan and I have been stating that we're not real comfortable at this point.
Well, I think we've given enough direction on this to where I would be okay with having, I know you're not available next week, Director Giardini, but if we had, because our February meeting is on Tuesday, February 1st. So there's not a whole lot of time to get this before February, unless we had a special board meeting the week of the 24th. And that's assuming we get the board assembled. And it would have to be that all that we have outlined here as a committee in terms of the financial modeling would be presented.
Mm-hmm.
I think because we can definitely say the recommendation from the fire committee is we need a new fire engine. I don't think there's any dispute over that. The big crux of this, the linchpin, is how we fund it.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the issue. So I would be okay if we come up with what we've requested here and meet maybe the week of the 24th as a special meeting with the board to kind of say how we fund it.
I wasn't available next week at the times that were designated. I did just come back from 8 days in Hawaii. So this week and next week are like majorly impacted, but.
Well, I'm looking at also allowing staff time to do the analysis that we've requested.
Okay,
So I guess I want to make sure I understand what you're speaking about. Are you suggesting then that the information that you requested would go directly to the board instead of come back to the committee?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that I don't anticipate the options you've come up with to being more affordable in the short term. They will be more expensive in the next 10 years. The savings will be in the 2030s. So, because, you know, either way, you're still having to come up with this is $1 million, you know, it's a it's a ballpark number, it's a $900,000 purchase.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at is very similar to what we already showed, plus that $900,000 being in there somehow, some way. The savings don't begin. This is the savings that you would see would not occur until the 2030s. Now, those savings will be significant. You know, in the order of 75 grand a year. But it'll cost you that much more in the first 10 years. Just ballpark rough numbers. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know that when we present you this next set of options that you're going to look at them and say, oh, that's more attractive. They're all going to be very painful financially.
It's ugly and it's ours. So I don't think that's what I'm saying is that I would rather have a special meeting of the board where all this is disclosed, because I think with what we've asked you to come back with, I don't think it's going to change anything to say, oh, this is a pretty option. Maybe in the lease arrangement, perhaps, but I don't know that it's going to be really where it's leaves us money where we're all comfortable. So I think I would rather have it just go before the board because the need is there, definitely. We don't have a reliable piece of equipment, and that does scare me. So we do have to make a decision. What I'm hoping is, can we make that decision before the February 1 to save the $83,000? Does that make sense?
I mean, I
It
think
makes sense, but go ahead, General Manager.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand. I think we will, I think we'll be pressed to do this work in a week. You know, I just heard from the Pierce rep that the lease information wouldn't be available till sometime, maybe the end of next week. So I just want to, maybe we could do a save the date kind of thing with the board. And if we can pull the information together in time, then we can go forward, and obviously Director Logan can call the meeting on 24 hours notice. But I want to make sure we have what the board would be looking for. I guess I don't think there's a silver lining here. What I'm trying to describe is the other alternatives I think are more financially viable long-term, but they're going to be more expensive short-term.
Short-term.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, if there's anything that we vote on that requires a change of policy, it hasn't gone to the fire committee meeting between now and the 1st either. So that's another concern.
So General Manager Brils, how are you feeling about the recommendation of changing the ordinance?
No, I don't, that is not something that you can consider right now. We don't have the ordinance would be predicated on completion of the master plan. That's 6 months away at the earliest. We need the conceptual drawings and the budget level estimates for the fire station work.
That's got to come first then.
Yeah, that has to come. You don't have anything to base it on right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So Director Logan, am I correct in hearing that then we would like staff to try and get these options for the entire board to look at a special board hearing that you would call before February 1st?
Correct. Yeah, because I don't think that what we're asking, I don't think is going to change anything to say, oh, we found the perfect solution, we found the money. I think we're still going to have money issues at the end of the day. So I would rather just have the board look at it. Because I don't know, what could be done otherwise. So I think it's an issue. We have unreliable equipment, and maybe we need more people. And I would even put out there the changing of the policy as an option as well.
Which policy?
The depreciation. Or is it on the replacement from the 50% to the 75% replacement allowance?
Well, you can have it under discussion, obviously. I'm not in favor of changing that policy. It's a safety net. But I'm a single vote on the board. So if it needs to go before the board, then it'll go before the board.
I just think we're stuck between a rock and a hard place here with not having sufficient money. I think that I think if we can get the analysis done, we can call a special meeting. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But certainly I would like to try and do that before the February 1st.
Okay. Jeff, do you have enough?
Yeah, so I think let me just kind of state what I think has occurred is that if we can complete the analysis that shows the various options that you've requested before February 1st, you would rather those just go to a special board meeting so that you have the potential of beating the February 1st deadline. However, if for some reason we cannot, this would come back to the committee for further discussion, and it would just go on the meeting. It would go forward in its due course. So we'd skip the second committee meeting if we could beat the February 1st deadline.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we'll extend the modeling, and I'll model a couple of ways that we could purchase, replace some equipment and do the repairs and so forth and so on. I think there's some ways to do it differently. Again, my belief is they will look more painful initially and the savings will occur down the road. And that's really where my biggest concern is, but make no mistake, this is going to be a tough pill to swallow over the next 10 years if you try to replace these pieces of equipment. We don't have the money in the bank to do it.
Okay. I believe that brings it to item number 3, grants. And so would that be Chief Peterson who would be updating us on that?
Yes.
Yes. So this is just kind of an update. We have submitted for an application to the FEMA Assistance to Firefighters Grant. This grant is $350,000. And I apologize, I think our portion of it is about $17,000 for 25 new sets of turnout gear, because our turnout gear is coming to the end of its life. The SCBAs, self-contained breathing apparatus, that's 16 new SCBAs. What's called a RIC pack, a Rapid Intervention Crew pack, which is essentially used for firefighters down to be able to go in and rescue them, and an airfill station, a permanent airfill station inside the fire station. And all of those items would add up to about $350,000. We've submitted that, and we should be hearing sometime, I'm hoping, before the fall. The second grant is a staffing grant. It's called SAFER, Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response. It is due at the end of this month. What I would like to do is try and obtain 2 engineer positions. That's a 100% paid for grant for 3 years. We don't have to guarantee that we keep these positions. I don't think there's any assumption that we're going to have the funding to keep the positions, but this is an opportunity to have 2 engineers, full-time staff for 3 years, 100% paid. And I'm looking at it from the aspect of, as we have a captain that's approaching retirement, additionally, it gives some of our existing reserves an opportunity to get to that next level to where they can apply for these positions. Plus, it's a cost savings for us for 3 years on the reserve end of things. So that is due at the end of the month, and I'd like to put in for that one. And that's it on the grants.
We've had SAFER grants in the past, and then there have been times when we've applied for them and haven't received them. I believe General Manager Brotz might have some history on to why we didn't get them. I think it was sort of how we wrote the grant proposal or the request. And so,
yeah, I've actually gotten grant verbiage from Cambria Fire Department, who just was awarded 3 firefighter positions.
Perfect.
Over there. So I've got the verbiage from them and going to use that same verbiage.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're competitive, so there's no
No guarantees.
Right. But I know that last time it was something. Anyway, good. Glad to hear that. Okay, on to item number 4 then, update on the fire station conceptual plans.
Oh, so that will start. Yeah, I'm sorry, I grabbed the wrong one. So that will actually start Tuesday. Rubio Medina has sent me out. We've gotten everything confirmed with him on the service agreement, and he will be showing up on Tuesday and starting the analysis of the station. He also has his crew coming in. They individually will be showing up to assess and analyze the different components of the station structurally, electrical, plumbing, and then start looking at the the expansion areas, what would have to take place there. So looking forward to that starting and working with them beginning Tuesday.
What-
I'm sorry.
Is he going to be there all day? Do you know what time he's arriving?
I don't have that yet. He said he was going to be getting that to me today, hopefully. I think first thing in the morning. I think he plans on staying on coming Monday and staying Monday night.
Okay, I have 3 meetings scheduled that day. I might be interested in tagging along. Would that be okay? That's a rare possibility, but would that be acceptable?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I don't see any issues.
Okay, if you could just let me know when he does, what time he thinks he's going to be on site, that would be great.
Sure.
And maybe the other, well, okay, never mind.
Yeah, I think if you
okay.
both wanted to attend, we need to call a committee meeting for that. I mean, you
Right.
could technically, it wouldn't be a violation of the Brown Act for the board, but since you're both committee members, it would make more sense to call a committee meeting if you both wanted to participate in that some way.
I'm going to pass on that. So I have another commitment on Tuesday.
Okay. And, okay, so that's the fire station conceptual plan update. And
Correct.
then item 5 for the chief again is departmental update.
Yeah, so this is just a brief update since November 30th through the January 11th. We've run 119 calls. We have had a significant incident in the district, which was a structure fire over off of Golden Meadows. We had 2 engines and 8 of our personnel show up to that incident, which was nice to see. The incident took approximately 2 hours to overhaul and investigate. So that was our one major incident in district. As far as the prevention end of things, we've had 7 plan reviews come in. A variety of things that are in the pipeline that I'm constantly getting emails about. So dealing with those. And then as far as department training, we did get a delivery yesterday of about $7,000 worth of donated building supplies, which are 2x4s, dimensional lumber, 4x4s, sheet plywood, and drywall, to start putting together a training prop down at the drill grounds. Additionally, our concrete will start the week after next around our training tower. And then we plan on starting our 3rd academy on Monday, the 17th. The last item is we did run our Christmas parade again this year, and that was another success. But your fire chief doesn't know how to read a map sometimes, and I wound up missing a street. So I heard about that. That concludes my report.
I have just one comment or question. The person or people or company that donated the lumber, will they be receiving a thank you letter?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, it's Wyrick Lumber.
And then can we post it on the Facebook to thank them, or Instagram, or, you know, something more widely so that other people so that their generosity is recognized?
He has asked us not to do that. I will ask him again. He's even very forward with the aspect that he doesn't want to receive a letter, but
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay.
I send him a letter anyways, and he's donated stuff in the past. But what he has requested is that he can come down and see our training to see what the actual materials are being used for? And I said, most definitely, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, so then I believe that brings us to the end of the meeting. And so I will call the meeting adjourned at 12:27. Thank you all for your patience during this long meeting. And have a good rest of the day and good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.